And good morning. Welcome to this edition of At the Mic. I'm your host, Keith Malinak. It is Saturday morning. Where are we at now? We are on February 24th, 2024. Getting ready to start part 8 of our 12-part series with Ed McCray, Disney guru, professor, you name it. That's what he is. And I hate it whenever I leave the audio up on this end. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm sure that you can hear that in the background. And boy, can you hear that? I tell you what, let me get Ed in here while I go and fix that. I think I got a computer across the room.
Yeah, I
messed up.
can
Hang
hear
on.
you in the background. Well, a couple of weeks ago, you did ask me about the Disney pins, where those came from. So I might as well start with that because they sell them at the parks and everything. And the reason they started doing Disney pins was because the year 2000, the Disney store sold all those pins with the films. And that's
This
what
is live, y'all. I'm sure you can obviously
Yeah.
tell. But yeah, I had a computer up on the other side there.
Oh, it's fine.
Anyhow, thanks, man. Thanks for making time here. Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you. Part 8, Disneyland. Ed McCray, the floor is yours. Good sir. Take it away.
Okay. Well, I'll point out I've never been to Disneyland. I've been to Disney World twice, and the last time was in 1996. And I've lost all interest in ever going to Disneyland because it's no longer what Walt made, what he created. And they've ripped out so much that
can't that be said of everything Disney related at this point?
Yeah, but at least you can visit the films if you can find them. You can't visit the location when they rip the things out or they change. Like Pirates of the Caribbean, you can no longer go there to see the version that Walt Disney made because now it's got all the movie characters in there, and they took a lot of the things out that Walt had in there, like the redhead, which we'll get into later. But the video we had everyone take a look at before, it was called People's. It was an episode of People and Places, and they did an episode on Disneyland a year after it opened. And what was interesting about that is the whole thing. You can see how it's like a World's Fair celebrating American ideals. In the first 2 minutes of that video or film, they quote the Constitution like twice. They say that Disneyland exists for its purpose is enlightenment. Its product is happiness. It could only happen in a place where freedom is a heritage and the pursuit of happiness is a basic human right.
Now, is this the electric park thing or
well,
no?
We're going to get there. This is my little introduction. That's where we're going to start because that's why Walt built Disneyland in the first place. What the first inspiration was.
Okay.
But and that film also ends where they do the flag ceremony where they take the flag down. I don't know if they still do that now, but when Walt was alive, his daughter said that he would get teary-eyed when they pulled the flag down at the end of each day. That dated all the way back to the Civil War. They do that ceremony, and he brought it into Disneyland. But the first thing that we open is Electric Park. This is when Walt's family moved to Missouri when he was a boy. There was a place called Electric Park, and he would go there. He would peek through the fence. Sometimes he'd crawl under the fence and explore the park. And many of the ideas that went into Disneyland are first found here. And there were a lot of these parks around the country, these kind of things at the turn of the century where they had light bulbs on the buildings and everything. There was 100,000 lights that illuminated this park. A train went around it. They had daily fireworks at closing time.
That entrance really looks similar to Disney World. You know,
now that's no longer there, the Electric Park. But
but I'm saying just looking at that just reminds
you can see how it influenced him. We have some pictures there with it lit up at night, and it looks just like Main Street with
even that lattice work and everything looks very familiar.
You can see how it inspired him, but a lot of these stories we tell, it's things when he was a boy that inspired the man he became and the things that he did.
Giant lake and everything, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So this was in Kansas City, huh?
Yeah.
And was this just a short-term?
Oh no, it was there permanently. I think it closed in the 1950s.
Oh well, okay, right, all right. This man. Very cool. Oh yeah, you definitely see a Disney park. Yeah, a lot of influence there, huh?
Yeah, it's those are all postcards from the time.
How cool, man. How cool.
Well, that one's not very big, but well, I don't know how many images we have, but I found a lot online.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff you can't. This isn't in any of the history books that this is what inspired him.
Wow.
A lot of the things we'll have today have been erased from Disney history.
boy, yeah, this just goes on and on,
Well,
man. You
well,
see the
we,
roller coasters there.
like Hershey Park. I'm sure you know when you guys were
Yeah,
around here. Yeah,
I've been
that was
there.
a similar kind of park when Milton Hershey built it. See, that's at night with all the light bulbs on the buildings, and that was because electric light was new at the turn of the century, so they were doing things like that on theme parks. That's the layout of the park there.
Okay, very good.
Now the next leg in this is when Snow White premiered. They built a little replica called Dwarfland or Snow White Island, and Walt commented to his staff that someday he'd like to build a theme park with his characters and their fantasy surroundings. And he talked about how there was nothing in Hollywood for families to do, and this is what it was there. It was just right near the theater where the film premiered. No, I don't know what happened to it after the movie was out.
Wow. Dwarfland, huh?
Yeah, that's the only picture I could find with the costumes, but that's
creepy.
the first time they ever made costumes. They did Mickey, but it was Halloween costumes, but that was for the premiere. And I guess they had little midgets there to play the dwarves.
Wow.
I know we can't say midgets now, but back then, even Wizard of Oz, they were dubbed the singing midgets in the credits.
Oh.
It wasn't a hateful thing, but that's the PC thing. That's where it was laid near the theater there. The theater's the place with the steeple.
Wow. All right.
And then the next leg was when he had his daughters, he would take his after Sunday school in church. He would take his daughters to Griffith Park, and they'd ride the carousel, and he'd sit on a park bench eating popcorn or peanuts. And he thought there should be a place where the parents and kids had fun together, and that's the carousel. And I have pictures of his daughters on the carousel plus Roy Jr. They're probably small, but there's his daughters. And that's Roy Jr. on the. You can tell that it's Roy.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Look at that! Wow.
Another play. He went over to Europe a couple times with his films when they were making films in Europe, and these were some of the places over there that influenced him. There was the Tivoli Gardens in Denmark, the Beckenscott Village in England, and the Modder Dam in Holland. And he took notes about these places. And Tivoli has popcorn lights on their buildings too. And that influenced what he did. And that was later after Disneyland opened because he looks older there, but that's at Tivoli Gardens.
Good pictures.
I tried to find all I could that had him in it, even the ones at Disneyland. Somebody should do a book of just all the places in Disneyland where he was. We posed for pictures and things. The next step was after the studio strike, he was advised to get a hobby to take care of his stress, and he was always interested in trains, and he started buying model trains and building miniatures. And a few of the animators also liked trains, and a couple of them had full-size trains in their backyard or trains you would ride on in your backyard. And he wanted to put a train in his backyard.
So I had a friend growing up who had a train like that in his backyard. I mean, and it was so out of place. Like, this is a low middle class neighborhood.
That's what this was. Yeah.
His backyard, his dad had built a train like that. I think that was his dad's job, was to repair these kind of miniature trains wherever they were. I don't know.
He had to that's the barn. It's modeled in the barn where he grew up, but that's where his shop was. And he had to landscape around his wife's flower beds to do this because she didn't really want to train in the backyard. He had the studio machinist Roger Brogy helped him, and this is a 1/8. See, he's got the cigarette in his mouth there. That was interesting too. He had him build a 1/8 scale with him. Walt learned how to.
But explain why that's interesting, Ed, about the picture of him with a cigarette in his mouth.
They've erased pictures of him smoking, but I think it's important to realize the reason he died at 65 is because he smoked. It's a cautionary tale thing. You learn from that. It's not, you shouldn't erase it. He smoked because he probably would have lived to build Epcot if he hadn't died of cancer, because everyone in his family lived another 15 years after 65. They all lived around 79, 80. And that's the sad part of the story. That's how, when I was a kid, that's what I always took from it. If he hadn't smoked, he would have lived longer. And now that's being robbed from people today because they digitally erased the cigarette out of his mouth in a lot of these old photos.
That is so wrong to do
Yeah,
that.
it's part of the story.
My gosh, I don't.
And so Walt actually built this train. He learned how to weld and work with metal and everything to do this. And he named the engine the Lily Bell after his wife. His wife's name was Lily. And he was one of the only people that had a backyard like this in Hollywood. And a lot of the actors would bring their children over. Edgar Bergen was one of his neighbors. He did Charlie McCarthy, but his daughter is Candace Bergen. And so, but she was known as Candy Bergen back then. And she would come over to Walt's house and ride the train. And one of the photos we have there is that the artist Salvador Dali is riding the train. There it is right there.
It is, yeah.
But they were going to do a film together. Now, it didn't get made when Walt was alive, but Roy Jr. finished it right before he died. But Salvador Dali rode the train at Walt's house.
That's awesome.
But he always was interested in miniatures and trains and everything. And that barn is where he built a lot of this stuff. And that barn, I think they moved to Griffith Park after he died. They sold. This was recently, last 20 years or so. And they have the train and everything there too. You can go see it, I guess. And then the next step was kids. It was Mickey Mouse Park. Kids kept writing Walt. And this is some of the fan mail he would get. I have 3 pictures there of Walt with the fan mail. They would write and ask him, where did Mickey Mouse live and all of the characters? And there was a 16-acre part of property across the street from the studio. And today, that's where the animation studio is that they built in the 90s. That's where it is now. But Walt wanted to build a theme park there. And his ideas quickly outgrew the little parcel of land. And many of the ideas that are on that map went into Disneyland. There's a main street there. The train went there. And he originally was going to have the train tour the studio and go over to that park. And this is him building miniatures. He built he wanted to build miniatures of scenes from his movies like Song of the South and So Dear to My Heart. This one's from So Dear to My Heart. And it's the kitchen from the cabin of the granny. And he had the actress voice do a little recording for 2 minutes. And they sent this to the Festival of California Living. And everyone that went to see it, they were all influenced. They all stopped. They wouldn't move on. And Walt knew he had something there, and he looked into how to do all these things. I mean, he built everything in that himself. He learned how to work with wood and everything, lathes and everything from scratch.
Wow.
And they decided it was too costly to do an exhibit of these traveling around the country.
Oops, sorry.
Oh,
hang on.
That's okay.
I'm trying to get the picture. Man, I have forgotten. I'm having a rough day here.
Well, that's okay.
Under the weather here. Okay, there we go. That's the effect I want to emphasize the picture.
And,
okay.
And when he was still going to do this park across the street, he then contacted the Burbank city managers because he wanted to see if they could connect a railroad between his studio and Griffith Park. And nobody was taking Walt seriously on this theme park thing. And Roy started like insulting and slamming him about it because Walt would always come up with these things that Roy would think was ridiculous, but then Roy would be the one to get the money, and it would always turn out eventually to be successful. And Walt started looking on his own for ways to generate money for the park. He met with the firm that was building Marine Land about building the park, and they told him that lot across the street was too small. So when they submitted the designs to Walt, he decided that the design was too practical, and he wanted his own artist at studio to embellish it. And as he got more serious about Disneyland, he started visiting other places that would influence the park. That should be the next folder.
Okay.
And one of them, I've been to this place twice. There was the North Pole, New York. And if you write a letter to the North Pole, this is where it goes. And it's still there. It's up near Lake Placid, New York. And I don't remember the name, but a Disney animator designed the buildings. And I was there when I was a little kid, the early 80s, and I was there again in the early 2000s, and it hadn't changed at all. They did. It's mostly stage shows, but they were still doing the same stage shows. And they even have a church in that park too for St. Nicholas, and it's got the little nativity and everything in it. But this was one of the first theme parks in America because the theme was the North Pole. Then he also had Knott's Berry Farm and the Henry Ford Museum. Now you can't find any vintage photos of the Henry Ford Museum for some reason. I don't know why. But then in The next part of the story was in 1952. He founded Wet Enterprises, and that became Walt Disney Imagineering. We'll finish doing the North Pole and the Knott's Berry Farm. That's Knott's Berry Farm there.
I love it.
That's out in California. That was the first competitor with Disneyland, even though it wasn't a theme park till after Disneyland. It was just a farm where they kept getting all these attractions for people to come see it. Probably kind of like around Halloween, you see all those pumpkin farms. They do all those things to get people to come in. It was kind of like that, but they did different kinds of produce. The reason he called it Wet Enterprises is because his initials are Walter Elias Disney, and he couldn't trademark Walt Disney Enterprises because it was too close to Walt Disney Productions. He wanted to be a separate company because when they sold stock in the studio, he lost control of the studio. He wanted Disneyland to be total control what he was going to do with it. And some of the buildings that were in that very first studio that had that billboard with the Mickey Mouse that lit up, they towed some of those buildings over to the new studio, and that's where he started Wet Enterprises, was in these little bungalows. And he loved it because it was nostalgic of when he was doing the shorts in Snow White and everything. That's what they were made in. And he borrowed against his life insurance policy. He cashed in property he owned. He mortgaged his everything he owned. That's Herb Ryman there. He's the one that designed the prospectus that Glenn Beck has with Walt. And interestingly, that's being erased from history now because Glenn owns it.
What do you mean?
Well, first when he got it, it was downplayed that it was important. And then they're saying, well, now their narrative is there's lots of copies of that prospectus around, so it's not important because of that. But that's what he sold Disneyland with. They went to the bankers with it. I don't know if they made copies of it. The stories and all the older books I have are they took the actual first edition of that prospectus to the banks. And it was only one bank, and they gave him the money. And so I don't know. This is like one of these things in history that's starting to change. It's because of who owns the prospectus. And Glenn put it out there for anyone to see. There's several sites that have it, but they always slam that he's the one that owns it. And I just think that's kind of ridiculous. It's like we're not allowed to care about Walt Disney or be Disney fans if we're not rampaging leftists, you know. But to get the money here, he told the studio nurse Hazel George about he needed money.
And there it is.
There it is, right there.
That's the one Glenn has, exactly.
He did that over a weekend with Herb there. I'll get to that in a second. If you just want to leave that up, and I'll get through my notes here to that.
Sure.
How he funded it. The studio nurse went around to the employees to see if they would contribute money towards Disneyland. They would do like $10, $20. But the reason that was done is because Walt wanted to shame Roy into getting behind getting money to fund Disneyland. And Roy started inquiring, where is Walt getting all this money to pay these employees at Wet Enterprises? And he found out that Walt had borrowed over $100,000 to pay them. And so Roy's the older brother. He gets involved, and he started to raise the money. He tells Walt, we're going to do this in a bigger way than you've planned. And they went to ABC, the network that wanted Walt to do a show for a long time, and they contributed for 1/3 ownership in the park. And Walt ended up buying out their interest within 2 years. This prospectus was in 1953. Roy took it to New York City to the banks to get the money to secure the loans for it, because nothing like Disneyland had been built. That's why they had to have this drawn up. And Walt had said to Herb Ryman that drew this, he said, dreams are too little collateral. And he went to Herb the weekend before this was due, and he said that he wanted him to draw this. And Herb Ryman declined. He said, you know, this was coming up for months. Why didn't you do it before? And Walt offered if he stayed with him all weekend, would he draw it? He agreed to draw it. And on that map, there's Lilliputian land. And the reason that's on there is because he named it after his wife, Lily. But that's also a reference to Gulliver's Travels. And Glenn thinks that was because of that became Small World, but I think it was what became Storybook Land, because that's all miniature buildings. And Herb Ryman he stayed with Disney for decades, even after Walt had died. He was designing things at Epcot, and he's the one that he rotated the castle around that is there today. They had the model of the castle, and the back of it is actually the front. The front is the back. When you look at it, you're looking at the back of the castle. But now we can go on here.
Okay. Let's see. Where's the next one here?
Yeah, and that's him when he was doing Epcot. That's Herb Ryman. There they are designing. The guy on the right is Harper Goff, and we're going to talk about him next here. There's a couple pictures in, yeah.
And remind us what Epcot would have become.
It was supposed to
Walt
be
lived longer.
The experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Now, this is Harper Goff. He was a genius creator, but people look at him and they make fun of what he looks like.
Okay.
But he's the one that designed Disneyland. There was a band of Imagineers called the Firehouse 5+2, and that's what that last picture was. That's them and the fire engine at Disneyland. But he's the one that started designing the close-up pictures. He was also there right on through Epcot as well. These people stayed with Walt right along, but he also designed the Nautilus for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And there's Walt with the model of it. And he also designed Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. All those, so there's another Disney connection to Willy Wonka. He designed everything, the sets and everything for that film. And he also did the submarine in Fantastic Voyage. They miniaturized the submarine and it goes into the human body. It was a science fiction movie in the 60s, very famous movie. Now this here is the guy in the middle. He's been erased from Disney history by Walt and Roy and everything. And this is C.V. Wood. And Walt and Roy realized they needed someone to oversee Disneyland, and they found this guy. He was a fast-talking Texan, and he was the first general manager of Disneyland, and he oversaw the construction. He secured contracts to get things going, like businesses would sponsor things inside Disneyland. And
you said that Walt and Roy erased him from Disney history?
You'll hear why here. He's been erased because he did a lot of shady things. And I think he's one of the people there as well. And those are the only two pictures I could find where he's in them, because that's how much he's been erased from the history. He did things like he collect kickbacks from some of the businesses on Main Street. He sold souvenir rights to his friends. He took credit for things that he should have took credit for. But what finally did was the final straw. When they bought the land, it was all it was orange groves. They were farming houses, and they had houses that were going to get moved, and they weren't. Some of the houses they owned, they made into the offices for the park staff, and that's it. Admiral Joel Fowler. I'll get to him in a second here.
Okay.
So what the C.V. Wood did is he burnt down the houses, and some of them weren't Disney property, and then he collected the insurance money on them and stuff like that. But C.V. Wood was there right through opening, but Walt fired him shortly after. And afterwards, C.V. Wood went and built over 35 other theme parks across the country, including Six Flags. He built one called Freedom Land in New York that lasted 4 years. It was supposed to be a direct copy of Disneyland. And he built theme malls, hotels, and housing communities. But he dubbed himself the master planner of Disneyland, so Walt and Roy sued him. And he wasn't allowed to say that anymore. And he's erased out of all the official histories of Disneyland. But if it wasn't for the C.V. Wood guy, they probably wouldn't have got it going, because he introduced him to this guy here. This is Admiral Joel Fowler. He was in World War II. He oversaw building a fleet of ships. And in the post-war America, he eliminated 57 unnecessary duplicate branches of government, like the alphabet soup stuff.
Nice.
And Wood brought him in to build the Mark Twain boat. That guy's John Hinch. I'll get to him in a second.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. And so Walt met with Admiral Joel Fowler, and he became interested in his backstory, and they swapped all these stories about what they were doing to get in World War II. And by the end of the meeting, Walt offered to have him oversee the whole entire building of Disneyland. And he was the one that was responsible for it to be built within a year. And he became the operator of Disneyland up till he died. And Fowler Harbor in Frontierland is named after him. And he also helped Walt plan Epcot. And when Roy built Disney World, he was the planner on that as well. but you don't see him too much in the history books. But at least you see him. You don't see C.V. Wood.
Gotcha. Hey, and so let's stop for just a moment and catch up here, because I mentioned Epcot, and if Walt hadn't have died, it would have been a completely different thing.
Yeah. You could have lived there.
Remind us what you were alluding to a few episodes back, as far as how Epcot relates to Reedy Creek and what's happening today with the transfer of ownership.
Reason they have all those special rights and privileges is because Walt believed in nuclear energy and all that stuff, and he wanted to put a nuclear plant there to fund it. It was going to be a place people could go to live. And that's why they have all these special privileges, or they had them. And because when Walt died, they couldn't figure out how they could make money having a city. So they made a theme park. But they were always going to have Disney World there, because that's the only way Florida would give them the rights for all those privileges. Florida wanted a Walt Disney World. And when they didn't build Epcot as a city, that should have been revoked, because that's why they were there.
Right.
Those rights were there. And they kind of exploited that, because they didn't have the same government oversight as a place like Universal Studios had. Mm-hmm. And they exploited that. And it's one of the tragedies they didn't build Epcot the way Walt wanted, and he's the only one that could have built it that way. But everything in his life, it always built on the previous thing. And like Epcot would have built on what he learned at Disneyland. They knew all the mistakes that we're going to get into, and they were going to build this city. They had everything underground so you wouldn't see truck drivers or anything coming in with the supplies. And there's computer generated models that they did of this in the 90s, what Walt's plans were going to be.
Man.
And good. And
cool. That's fascinating, man.
I wish they would have built it. Now that's John Hench. He was one of the other artists at Disney. He started there in the 30s, and he went on to be the longest employed Disney employee. He only died about 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
He was there right along. And there he is with one of the models there. He worked in the animation studio. A lot of these guys that did the planning, they worked in the animation studio, and then Walt brought him over to Imagineering. But part of that was because he controlled Imagineering, and that kind of protected them from the studio politics.
And what was his name again?
John Hench.
John Hench.
And what's interesting about that, when I was in college, there was that documentary that came out about Walt Disney, and he's in the documentary, and my professor didn't have any idea who he was, but he was a former Disney employee himself.
Oh my!
And he was he was there at from the 1930s on, and because he wasn't one of the 9 old men, he didn't know who he was. I knew who he was, but
right.
This is Walt with some of the plans and the maps there.
Well, that's why I call you professor, man.
Well, I don't know if I want to be a professor, but I know enough to get by. But
look at that. That's a great picture there.
No, that was the map there. And what they did is they went to the Stanford Research Institute, where the fastest growing places in California were going to be. There were 70 sites, and this was Disneyland, I think, was on the 3rd site. And there was a family. This is what an interesting statistic that's kind of tied into this. There was a Japanese family bought a farm in 1954 around this property, 56 acres. They paid $10,000 for it. And in the 1990s, they sold it back to Disneyland for over $100 million.
Wow.
Because they wanted to expand. And they only sold 52 of the 56 acres. Now, Disneyland was built on 160 acres of orange groves and walnut trees. Original land was owned by 17 different families. And they built the whole place for $17 million in 1954 dollars. And most of the rides from the 70s on cost $17 million to build in their contemporary dollars. So that's kind of interesting there. And Walt marked the orange trees he wanted to keep with red ribbons, and the ones he wanted to remove with green ribbons. And the bulldozer driver was colorblind, and he wiped them all out. And so Walt had to get trees from the freeway that was getting built. And
I bet Walt was beside himself.
Yeah, there's stories about this whole Disneyland thing opening within a year that he.
Oh my gosh!
You're surprised he didn't have another nervous breakdown, but we'll get into that.
Is this right?
Yeah, I don't know what folder we're in, but
I went to construction.
Okay, right? Yeah. Just show this where I'm talking about it.
Okay.
Now the ABC, the reason they wanted the Walt having a TV show is they wanted to compete with the bigger networks. They almost went bankrupt themselves, and Tinkerbell was made the mascot of the show because if it failed, Walt didn't want Mickey Mouse on something that failed. And they used the show to promote Disneyland. And contrary to popular belief, it did not air Wednesday nights or Sunday nights. It aired Wednesday nights when it first started. So the Wonderful World of Disney started out as a show called Disneyland and airing on Wednesday nights that showed progress reports from the park and all these different entertainments that tied in with the park. And that's the Orange Grove before they built anything on it. That's Walt in the field there. And there's a film of him that this comes from. And he's there mapping it out because he was the only one who could see what Disneyland was going to be. Kind of like what happened to Epcot. That's one of the stories there. But because it was built on a tight budget, they did things like reuse things like there's carousel horses in Disneyland, and those he bought from Coney Island. The giant squid from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was used there. Like I said, they got the trees from the LA freeway. And they had a lot of problems, like when they first filled the rivers of America, the water drained overnight, and they had to put clay in the ground to keep the water there. And Admiral Fowler had nightmares about this river flooding. Losing water again overnight, because there's just they had one thing after another. The first building that they finished was the Opera House, and until 1960, that was the Disneyland Mill where they would do all the woodworking, and it became the headquarters for the Mickey Mouse Club in 1964. And today it houses Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. And
is that it right there?
Yeah, that's where they're building it.
Okay.
Now, one of the videos we're going to link to in our links today is it's footage of them building Disneyland.
Yeah, y'all don't forget in the description, shortly after we're done with the live stream every day, there's supporting links and videos and all sorts of stuff in the description. So go back and check that out if you want more information on a lot of the stuff that Ed is going through.
I found every one that I know of, every show Walt filmed at Disneyland when he was alive, so you can see what it was like when he was there.
Wow.
And now opening day with the castle, people thought that you could go up inside it, and you can't or couldn't at that. I mean, now you can, I guess, but they had to kick everybody out. And on opening day, there was a gas leak because under the castle, and it almost burned down.
That would have been tragic.
Yeah, well, they kept it out of the papers. It was one of the workmen dropped a cigarette butt, and it set the gas on fire.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
I know when I was a kid, there was a video. I don't know where it come from, but there's a video where they had the mice from Cinderella singing about building Disneyland. It was the work song from Cinderella, and I couldn't find that as a standalone, but it might be in one of the films that I've linked to.
Okay.
But they just had those time-lapse photography cameras there filming this so that you could just see it all building up on its own. And I know a lot of that stuff got sent to some of those salt mines where they store films. They quickly made as many copies as they could in the DVD age, and Roy put it out on one of the Walt Disney Treasure sets. It's one of the bonus features where they're building Disneyland. But you just think of it always being there. You don't think of it being built. And it was built within. It was actually built within 9 months because they had to clear the trees and build up the land and everything. And today you couldn't even get the rights to build something within 10 years.
The permits alone would take more than 9 months.
Well, look at what they built the Empire State Building a little over a year too. I mean, it was a different place.
Look at that.
That's where they're building the engine there. And when they were building the park, they were working on it up to the night before, and when the customers came, the paint was still wet in some places. The pavement wasn't hardened, and women were losing their high heel shoes in the pavement, so they had to give them Indian moccasins because that was the only shoes that they were selling at Disneyland. It was sold in Frontierland. But
that is hysterical.
Oh, I got a lot of stories here. It's the very next thing. It's the opening day.
Opening day, here we come.
Walt was on site getting things ready past midnight. He went and stayed in his apartment above the firehouse. It opened July 17th, 1955. There were only 18 rides and attractions. The gates didn't open till 2 p.m. The admission was $1. There were only supposed to be 10,000 people there, but there ended up being 33,000 official guests, and there were a lot of counterfeit tickets out there, and the park was flooded over capacity.
God.
And story about that is the parking lot. Roy didn't know if this was going to be a success or not, and one of the guys called from the parking lot. He was all panicked because he said there's people that are backed up and they're going to the bathroom in the parking lot. And Roy thought it was just one person. He looked out and saw these cars there, and he was all happy they were there. And he just said, let them go wherever they want. And they called this day Black Sunday. It was over 100 degrees.
Oh,
and
no.
The TV broadcast was the largest broadcast of that kind ever done up to that time. Had over 90 million viewers, 29 cameras. And one of the things we've linked to, it'll have footage of this where you see it was the analog days. So there's cables hanging across the street to all these cameras and everything. And the show was hosted by Walt's friends, Bob Cummings, Ronald Reagan, and Art Linkletter.
Yeah, that was back in episode, what was it? We did 2?
I linked to the whole show in our links here because it was opening day. Good. And there were so many people there. Reagan had to climb over an 8-foot fence to reach one of the places he had to speak from. And there was a plumber strike right before the park opened, and there were a lot of union strikes that plagued Walt on this, and they could only, the union people, when they finally settled the strike, they said we can only build the drinking fountains or the bathrooms. And so Walt said that people can drink Coke or Pepsi, but they can't go in the street, and he told them to build the bathrooms. But because of this C.D. Wood guy, they put in pay toilets. And Walt went in and told him to rip them all out. Because he said that's like inviting a guest in your home and charging them to use the bathroom.
That is, oh my gosh.
And they ran out of toilet paper at opening day. And that's the first kids that came in the park right there.
How cool would that be, man?
Well, they're in one of our shows for the 35th anniversary. They came back as adults. There's the spaceman drinking a Coke. Walt went out and got toilet paper to bring into the park himself because they ran out. They ran out of food. The garbage trucks didn't come to pick up the trash.
Oh.
There was a power outage and a gas leak in Fantasyland. Every ride except the Jungle Cruise broke down. The Mark Twain paddle boat was overloaded to capacity and it partially sank.
What a nightmare, man.
The story where he asked, well, he got a lot of bad reviews, and they said Walt almost had a nervous breakdown about it.
I bet.
And they had their 1 millionth guest by 8 weeks being open. And he'd been told this place was going to fail by all the experts. He had sent people to go talk to the experts, and they told him like doing the fancy landscaping was a waste of money because you wouldn't make any money doing that. I mean, people don't realize this was the only place like this that was ever built. There were places like that in North Pole Park, but not at this scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just, I mean, one man's dream. It's incredible.
But he knew the people to bring on to, that's Reagan there.
Yeah.
He knew who to bring on to make it happen. Like that Harper Goff guy, how he hired Harper Goff was, he was in a store buying a model train, and that's the original costumes there, Mickey and Minnie. Scary, aren't they? They look like jack-o'-lanterns.
Oh my goodness. They look like the stuff of, that's nightmare fuel right there. Ooh.
How he hired Harper Goff as they were both arguing over the original. They wanted to buy the same model train, and he found out he was an artist. They liked trains, so he hired Harper Goff to design Disneyland. Now that Donald Duck one, he sees out in his neck.
I see that, and I also see how you've got the Mickey costume over here.
Yeah, they got their head off.
Yeah, that is verboten today, is it?
Yeah, you're not allowed to take the head off. When I went in '96, I did a behind the scenes tour, background tour, and I asked them questions about the costumes. They wouldn't answer the questions. I asked them how they made the heads, and they all kind of changed the subject. People are like, why are they changing the subjects? Because they don't want people to know that they're costumes. I just was curious how they made the costume heads because I was in high school.
Yeah, no, no, that's not, they're not allowed to disclose anything. Okay, so which folder am I going to next? Am I going to the Main Street folder here?
Yeah, I got a little more here to finish, but
okay.
But you can open it up there. Get ready.
Okay.
Now the Disneyland band he originally hired for 2 weeks, but they've been there ever since. It was the only park where employees dressed in themed costumes depending on which land they're in. Originally, the employees just had a number on their badge, but in 1962, they changed it to the first name basis as cast members. Now you guys can read that yourselves when I'm talking here, but that was every place got a dedication. We played Walt's dedication for the whole theme park. Each land had its own dedication, and Walt gave the dedication, and that's the one for Main Street. Up until the year 2000, the employees weren't allowed to have facial hair. And now look what the employees are like now. Only Walt could have facial hair. The theme park was the only one that they piped cents into the different lands so you could immerse yourself in the land. And that's the town hall, I think. When a ride breaks down today, it takes 20 minutes to restart the ride. That's the fire hall where Walt's apartment is up above. There's a picture of his apartment next, I think. Walt didn't have gum sold in the parks, didn't want visitors stepping in it. And the animation cells from the studio were sold in the park as souvenirs for $1 because they were considered worthless at the time.
Wait, say that again. What was sold for $1?
The animation cells used in the films. They were sold
word.
Yeah. And that's how they got rid of all the animation cells that still existed. Well, most of them. And to ride the rides back then, it was $250 for an adult, and there was a ticket book. And this was introduced on October 11th, 1955. And that's where you get the term like an e-ticket ride. That started in 1959, but there were A, B, C, D tickets. And the tickets never expired. Most of them were used kept as souvenirs of people that kept them. And those went out in 1982 where they went to where you could ride anything if you went to the park. That's Walt with his wife there.
Wait, say that again about 1982. What happened?
That's when they quit doing the ticket books.
You
could ride any ride if you're in the park. Before then, you could only ride one e-ticket ride, one A-ticket ride.
I see.
The Lincoln, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln was free for anyone to see, but everything else you needed a ticket. And what Walt said about his park is the park was not set up for a quick buck, but it is a long-range development. We must make Disneyland into an attraction that will never be in competition with anything else. It must be impossible to duplicate. Now that flagpole, that was a street lamp that got hit in L.A., and Walt refurbished it into a flagpole when he was building Disneyland. Because he was doing all these things to save money. Now, Main Street is the gateway into the park. It has a lot of the American ideals that made the other lands possible. It's inspired by Walt's hometown and the hometown of Harper Goff. The City Hall is modeled after the City Hall courthouse that's in Fort Collins, Colorado, and that was Harper Goff's hometown. There's no corners on Main Street, so it has the small town warmth and feel and no urban coldness. There's names painted on the windows that thank all the people that are involved, or a lot of the people involved in Disney's past.
So you say, hold on, did you say that downtown Disney area here, what have you?
Well, that's Main Street.
Well, Main Street was modeled after downtown Fort Collins, Colorado?
That was partly of the influence. The other one was in Missouri, Marceline, Missouri.
That is so cool. Okay.
Well, Fort Collins was the hometown of Harper Goff. They grew up very similarly, and that's a lot of the influences came from.
Okay.
And the first now that Indian is probably not there anymore, but the names on the main, that's Walt's dad. That was the first window on Main Street. That was when they opened. That was to thank his dad, and they continued that with park employees. And there's also one of the doors on Main Street is for a Dr. Benjamin Silverstein, and that was put on Main Street so they had a place to put Hanukkah decorations. Walt's supposed to be an anti-Semite according to the strikers, and once again, another thing he did recognize Jewish people. The Penny Arcade, when they opened, it had a shooting gallery that used real ammunition of 22 caliber rifles.
What?
And that's not there anymore. There's over 100,000 bulbs on the buildings in Main Street. And they're changed when they've reached 80% capacity so they don't ever burn out. The buildings are built in forced perspective, so they seem to be taller than they are.
Hold on, say that again about the bulbs burned out. What? I missed that.
Oh, the bulbs, they pull them out when they've reached 80% of their design life so they don't burn out.
So somewhere they have a database, I assume?
I guess, but this goes all the way back to Walt. But I know under Eisner, they were starting to burn out, and people were unhappy about that.
I bet.
And that was around the time when they got rid of Eisner. The gas streetlights in Main Street, those all came from scrap yards, and they originated from St. Louis, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. And a lot of them are 200 years old. And one time the electric went out, and the gas lights led the people out of the park. that flagpole, by the way, Walt paid $5 for that when it was a lamppost. And there were two cannons on Main Street, and the real 19th century cannons used by the French Army. That key I found, it was on eBay, and it sold for hundreds of dollars because it's not carved into. That's from 1955. Wow. I just found that when I was doing research this week. I thought it was kind of neat because probably you paid a quarter or a nickel or something for something like that at the time, and somebody made hundreds of dollars on that. A couple more things, then I'll get off of Main Street. They coat the horses' shoes with polyurethane so the clip-clop sound is louder on the street. And they put vegetable oil on the street cars so they won't screech. And all the different lands of the park, the trash cans are painted to blend in with each land. And there's a large colony of feral cats in Disneyland to keep the rodent population down. That goes all the way back to when Walt was alive. But you don't think about the things like that.
But you don't see the cats, though.
I know. And that video, that film that I mentioned everybody should see before we started this today, where they had that flag retreat ceremony. I don't know if they still do that, but if somebody's been to Disneyland or Disney World, maybe put in the comments, do they still take the flag down at the end of the day? Because I don't know. I couldn't find anything about that online. There's 4 trains in Disneyland, and originally they were named after the executives of the Santa Fe Railroad: C.K. Holliday, E.P. Ripley, Ernest S. March, and Fred Gurley. The track around the park is 1.5 miles, takes 20 minutes to go around the track. And there's Morse code played on the teletype at the train station. And in Morse code, it plays, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome," from Walt's speech when he opened the park. And the Imagineers hid some off-color remarks in the Morse code, and then Walt revealed his wife had once been a Morse code operator and could understand it, so they got rid of that.
That is hysterical.
I've got a lot of little stories like that where they would try to sneak things past Walt, and he was always on to them.
Do you want to go to Adventureland next? Or
yeah,
where we headed?
Okay. Whichever order was next there.
Yeah, Adventureland is next.
I don't have a lot to say on Adventureland because there's his opening there, his remarks to dedicate it. And I don't know if those Andersefs there, if those are actually where he paused or if they've erased things that he said. Now, this was originally supposed to be on the east side of the park, but there was an existing grove of eucalyptus trees on the orange grove for windbreak, for the trees. So he built Adventureland on the east side. And the signature ride was the Jungle Cruise that was based on the true life adventure films. And it's supposed to be a journey through Asia, Africa, and South America. I think I've got a folder for the Jungle Cruise there.
Yes, you do.
Walt wanted real animals, but it was told they'd sleep through the day, so he had to make animatronic animals, and that was the start of the auto animatronics. The original narration was serious in tone, but then in 1959, after they didn't do Chanticleer and Renard, Mark Davis, who had been behind that, Walt told him to go over to Disneyland and give him his honest opinion. And Mark Davis said that it was the theme park's very serious. It should have some comedy in it. So he put a lot of the comedy stuff in the Jungle Cruise ride. And the water's tinted brown to hide how that river is only 3 feet deep. And that shows you when they're putting the hippopotamus in. And some of this stuff on the Jungle Cruise isn't there anymore because of wokeness. Also, yeah, some of these might be a little small, but I had Walt in the picture. That's why it's there. That's when they're putting the animals in. That's Harper Goff there. He designed those boats too. Our Harper Goff's on the left there.
These are great.
Now, John Laster also was a skipper of one of those boats when he worked at Disneyland back in the 70s. These are the drawings Mark Davis did, and then you'll see the animatronics that were built. But I guess that's not there anymore because some of the natives are up in the tree, and the woke doesn't like having the natives as part. They think it makes them look silly. But there's the white Englishmen are up in the tree too.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I mean, it's supposed to be funny. It's not, people
Right.
take this stuff too seriously. But I guess that's not there anymore.
Really?
Yeah, save any photos you find. It now, originally there was a monkey one there. There's a monkey there. Now this character's gone too. This is Trader Sam, and he
Yeah,
was. You remember Trader Sam?
I
And
do.
he's in one of our videos. Because there's a cruise, there's a ride through the Jungle Cruise when Walt was alive, and the joke was that he would give you a couple of his shrunken heads for your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a gag that wasn't in there. That one's the elephants that are bathing in the pool. Then there's a Swiss Family Robinson Tree House. And I have some photos there where it was being built. I thought that was kind of interesting because people don't realize how this stuff was built. No one had ever built anything like this at the time. So,
Oh wow! Look at that.
and it's still there. I guess they rethemed it. It was rethemed for Tarzan, the movie, when they did the animated movie. And I guess then it got rethemed back to Swiss Family Robinson. And there's these plaques hanging around or they were around there when Walt was alive. And it's got little sayings about the mother and father and everything. And I don't know if they're still there, but I thought that was kind of interesting too. That's the intro when you go in. And if you remember the movie, that's where they lived, and some of the artifacts from the movie are in the original treehouse. I don't know if they're there now, but they were. So what's our next land? I don't remember.
Let's see. Next up, sir, is Frontierland.
Okay, I got it right here. Now that what I did here is we're going to look at some of the attractions. See, with a lot of these, we're looking at the attractions that were there and have been added or taken away over the years. And Adventureland didn't have too many when they first opened. These posters they did for all of the different attractions in the park. So I put those in where I could find them online. But when they first opened, they had a fort and they had a stagecoach and a mule pack train. And the mules were the first employees of Disneyland, but they eventually got removed because they kept bucking the customers and biting the kids. And every time there was a lawsuit, Walt would lose a lawsuit. That's the intro to the dedication to Frontierland. There's Walt with a stagecoach. That's a real stagecoach they refurbished, and I saw it was sold online a couple years ago. So I guess that's not there anymore.
Wonder how much that went for.
I don't know. They were selling all this stuff from Disneyland at the time at this auction.
That's sad.
It is sad. It should be a museum for this stuff.
Right.
That's the fort. I don't think that's there anymore because I don't remember seeing that when I was a kid in the shows that were filmed there. Some of the things that were there at the time, they had the Rainbow Mountain Cavern mine train.
Hang on a second. This is the fort at Disneyland.
Yeah, we're only doing Disneyland today.
Okay, just making sure because
some of that made it hard. I know there's Fort Wilderness there. That's where I would stay when we went to Disney World. But
wow, look at that.
I think that might even been called Fort Wilderness at the time. You could ride canoes and stuff down the river too back then.
I mean, that looks like.
Well, he had people come in to build it. Well, that's the one that was at Disneyland. I don't know what happened to it.
Man.
But they also had an Indian village. We'll show a little later, and that's not there anymore either. They had the Mike Fink keel boats. That the Rivers of America there. It had the Columbia, and that was the first American vessel to sail around the world. That's why he put it there. And he used the plans from the HMS Bounty, from Mutiny on the Bounty, to build that. And when they built the Columbia, Admiral Fowler told Walt that it was customary to put a silver dollar under the mast, under each mast for good luck, back when they actually built those kind of ships. So Walt went into his pocket and he pulled out 3 silver dollars and they put them under the mast. And the Mark Twain paddler, that was the first one of those built in almost a century. And it's guided by an underwater track. And when I was looking up photos for this, I found some weird thing where they have a demon pulling the Mark Twain for Halloween now.
What?
I'll have to show that in a future show, but that is just very bizarre.
Oh,
like you're going into the 7th level of hell or something. There's this giant hooded figure that rides before the Mark Twain. It's the size of the Mark Twain. It's a giant. We'll get to it here. There's the Mike Fink keel boats. Those are the actual keel boats from the Davy Crockett and the River Pirates movie. They refurbished them so people could ride in them. That's Tom Sawyer Island, and that's the only attraction Walt officially designed himself. The designers had designed it, and he redrew it and renamed everything on the island. And his brother Roy said that was like what they used to play. There was like an island in Missouri they'd play on as kids, a little island, and that's what Walt was doing. And he said that everything like that I think that's actually where they were christening the Mark Twain. She's there at the front of the boat with a bottle. That's Irene Dunn, and she was in the film Showboat. And I don't know how much of this is still at Disneyland now.
Right.
But when they opened, Frontierland was the largest land in Disneyland. But a lot of that was because Walt loved American history. You have to know where you've been to know where you're going. And that's it. That was just to accommodate American history. A lot of it was educational. So was Adventureland and Tomorrowland. They all had aspects of educational material.
What an undertaking this is.
That's the keel boats. Well, this wasn't all done in 1 year. A lot of this, they just kept adding to it each year, because that was the keel boats, I think, were 1956, because that was the sequel to Davy Crockett. It didn't do as well as the first. And the film isn't as good as the first, but the guy they have playing Mike Fink, he's who you'd want to play Mike Fink, but he's not as good as he was in other films he did for Walt Disney, where he played similar characters. I think one of those sank, and the other one rotted away in recent years. They had to use it as a set piece, just setting off to the side. But I don't know if people even realize all this went on there. There's some of the people in the Indian canoes. That's the mules there going through. No, they were only there for a little while. And a lot of the architecture and things from these attractions that are gone, they put into the Big Thunder Railroad. They moved all the buildings and everything. And that's the mine train. I think now it's derailed off to the side as a set piece on the Big Thunder Railroad. But American West was a big deal in the 1950s. That whole genre.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what it looks like today.
Boy, these pictures are fascinating.
I tried to find things that there's not all these in the history books for Disneyland. That was to announce when they opened the Columbia. Now, this is the thing I got down a rabbit hole on this today. Now, Aunt Jemima's Kitchen was open when they opened the park, and it was Walt's favorite restaurant in the park, and it was Aunt Jemima's Pancake House when they first opened. They later renamed it to Aunt Jemima's Kitchen in the 60s. And there was an actress named Eileen Lewis who played Aunt Jemima, and she interacted with guests. And the restaurant was so popular, they had to make it bigger. And it became a franchise of restaurants in the United States, Canada, and the UK. And Aunt Jemima's restaurant closed at the theme park in the 1970s. You can just show what it looked like there. I got a couple of pictures there. But Walt, when he would stay in the park, he would always go there right when they opened to eat breakfast at Aunt Jemima's Kitchen. and the reason it's not there is because of the left. And I've learned all kinds of interesting things today. Like you can't, if you look up Aunt Jemima on eBay, you'll find 56 hits this morning, including a book of Aunt Jemima memorabilia, but none of the memorabilia is on eBay. So I don't know if they have it blocked. But the story of Aunt Jemima, where they were doing the character for the marketing, she was supposed to be a woman that she was a slave, but the Confederate Army came in and they wanted breakfast before they went to get the Union troops, and she kept them there just feeding them her pancakes. And the Union Army got away, and they ended up losing the Civil War over this. This was the story they used to sell Aunt Jemima. So they made her into like a war hero that freed the slaves with her pancakes. And this goes back to the 1800s. And when I posted these photos on Twitter the other day, I had like 3 people come up telling me that the Nancy Green story, Nancy Green was the actress who was Aunt Jemima, and she became a millionaire, and she built a lot of churches with the money she made. They tried to say none of that story is true because it's been scrubbed online, but I have printed books that tell that story.
Oh yeah, I mean, history is being erased. I mean, that was the motivation of this series that we're doing with you, is to make sure this stuff is out there.
I just had no idea you couldn't go out and get merchandising of Aunt Jemima now because of that. I knew that it's not politically correct anymore, but I didn't like the movies. You can go out and get old movies and still see them. I didn't know they have it, so you can't even go out to get the old merchandise. And I know there are people that, like Whoopi Goldberg, she calls it Negrobilia. She would go out and buy that stuff because I know people who were dealers that sold it to her. This is the Indian village at Frontierland, and it was removed around the same time as Aunt Jemima's kitchen.
Right.
And Walt had 19 tribes he hired to come in, and they would share with the Indian customs and everything with the guests. I mean, he paid them to be there. There's Walt actually there. And one of the videos we have, it's for the opening of the Haunted Mansion, but it shows the Indian village there in one of the sequences. And those are authentic teepees, longhouses, totem poles, birch bark longhouses. The tribes would come from all over the country. What was there after that, Splash Mountain was on that land. Now it's going to be that Princess and the Frog thing. But why this is gone and Aunt Jemima's gone is I learned this morning. On August 6, 1970, there was the political group, the Yippies, said they were going to invade Disneyland. Now, August 6th was the anniversary of where the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, and that's why they chose that date. And they said they were going to have Black Panthers come in and have breakfast at Aunt Jemima's and free her from slavery. They were going to have the feminist liberation of Minnie Mouse, barbecue Porky Pig that's not even a Disney character, and they were going to capture Tom Sawyer Island and protest the Vietnam War and hang their flag there. And 300 of them showed up, and they went dancing down Main Street, swearing at all the customers and everything, carrying flags with marijuana on them. 23 of them were arrested. The police were called, and they closed the park for the day. And it so freaked out the Disney management, this disappeared, and so did Aunt Jemima's kitchen.
Wow.
And I didn't know this part of the story till this morning. That's why I have photos of this.
6th, 1970.
Yeah. And the Yippies were political. I didn't either. It was a political group of I forget, it was the Young something or other. And this was the minority representation at Disneyland, and they got it removed. And they wanted the people that participated in these attractions, they wanted to be there. So they weren't oppressed or anything. I mean, that Indian village, that was teaching people about American history with the American Indians. And that history book I showed a few weeks ago that was was the last one before Woodrow Wilson changed everything. Mm-hmm. There's a very lengthy section there about the Indians in American history. And Walt would have grown up with that in his curriculum. So that explains why that was part of everything he did.
Wow. Let's see where we headed next.
Well, the Golden Horseshoe Revue is in that Frontierland folder too. That's the last part of Frontierland.
There we go. Found it.
The Golden Horseshoe Revue, Walt personally selected the cast there. And before the park opened, he had his wedding anniversary there with his wife. And one of the links we've linked to in this, it's the Golden Horseshoe Revue was an episode of Disneyland where they did a show of what the show was like. And Walt loved this attraction because it reminded him of vaudeville from when he was a boy. And he often celebrated his birthday there. And the actors in this were Betty Taylor and Wally Bogue. He hired them on a temporary basis, but they ended up being the longest performers of any live show in the Guinness Book of World Records. And it ran from 1955 to 1986. It was the first stage show at Disney. And I think that's Wally Bogue on the stage there. That's Betty Taylor. And there's Wally Bogue again. There they are together. I mean, and you'll see this in our links. You can see what the performance was, and there's this link here. There's an image here from that show because he had Annette Funicello in that as well. And people loved this when they went to Disneyland. It was a signature attraction. That's Julie Andrews, because she started out with Wally Bogue in vaudeville, I'd mentioned on an earlier show, and that they performed on stage after Mary Poppins. And that's Annette Funicello. And she was really the first teen star that Disney had. And she didn't end up a train wreck like a lot of the ones today. That's a cast album there that they did. I think Fantasyland's next, right?
Let's see here. Yes, sir.
And Fantasyland is what everybody thinks of with Disney, but that Frontierland was really the foundation bedrock of why he did a lot of these things. But people will call that, they call the Fantasyland the heart of Disneyland. The Sleeping Beauty Castle, that was, Sleeping Beauty didn't come out to 1959, but he built that for when Disneyland opened for 1955. Because Disney, Sleeping Beauty got slowed down because of, now that's a model of the park there. It got slowed down because he was busy with Disneyland. And that's based on a castle in Germany. Disney's family crest flies above it in the coat of arms. And that's the focal point of the park. It's 4 stories tall, and it's built in forced perspective, just like everything else.
I love it.
And it's the smallest of the Disney castles. And that drawbridge actually works, but it's only been used twice. It was used when they opened, and it was used in 1983 when they rebuilt Fantasyland. And now Dumbo was originally going to be a ride with the pink elephants on parade, but Walt decided to change it to Dumbo because he didn't want to encourage kids to drink. And when Harry Truman visited the park, he refused to get a picture taken on Dumbo because it was too much Republican symbolism. And I don't understand. Harry Truman's like the only honorable Democrat president we've ever had. I don't even understand why he was a Democrat. When you read his policies and everything, the things he did, he sounds like a conservative.
That's funny.
That was the Chicken of the Sea restaurant is the pirate ship. And that's Storybook Land there. And you can't find pictures of what it looked like when Walt was there. Storybook Land. There are several Storybook dark rides in the park. And how they were originally built was when you're riding in the boat or Mr. Toad's car, you're supposed to be that character. But people kept getting confused why they didn't see Mr. Toad in the ride or Snow White. So they had to add those characters in 1983 into the rides. And the Teacups, that was one of the first rides, and that's the ride that most of the park guests get sick in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they've changed the design a few times. And interesting thing about the Mad Hatter there, where he has, he's got that fraction on his hat that's 10 over 6. And that means his hat sold for 10 shillings and 6 pence.
Oh, is that what that means?
That's what that means.
Okay.
I just thought I'd stick that in there. I think I have a picture of Walt even in the teacups there somewhere. Another thing they had there for those dark rides, they had Snow White, Peter Pan, and Mr. Toad when they first opened. They added Alice, and in 1983 they added Pinocchio, but they've since took out Mr. Toad, I think. They also had the Casey Jr. roller coaster, and then they couldn't make it work as a roller coaster, so that became a standard ride. And the carriages on that train, those are the carriages from the carousel when they bought the carousel horses from Coney Island.
So here's the Peter Pan ride, huh?
That's the Peter Pan ride. He had to hire outside the park to have people build the things like that, the rides, the track systems and everything, because no one had ever done anything like this before.
Mm-hmm.
That rides along Storybook Land, and the buildings of Storybook Land are at 1/12 scale. And when Walt went through it, he thought that the houses looked like they were too pristine, and he was talking to someone about it, and they figured out the way you could age the roof is with urine, and that's how they aged the houses in Storybook Land.
Oh my gosh, Ed. They would pee on the houses?
Well, no, they collected it and sprayed it on. But people don't think of things like this. But that's like a detail to make it look like it was lived in. And I don't mean to be gross or anything.
I mean, facts is facts, right?
Yeah. That's an example how they built the facade in 83 for Toad Hall, but before it was just like a little banner out there that said it was Toad Hall. And that's like one of the most famous rides, and they tore that out, Mr. Toad. And and for Snow White, that's the prop that's most stolen at Disneyland was the Queen's poison apple. So they end up putting a hologram apple in instead. And that's the Peter Pan ride. But,
okay.
I'm just throwing that in there because it was the dark rides.
Gotcha. People would steal the apple.
Yeah, there's Walt on the Peter Pan ride. Now this Mr. Toad, that's what it was like when it first opened, but now or later it became a facade of Toad Hall. And that's when they put Alice in, and that ride was designed by Mary Blair, who worked on the original film.
Oops.
And this is the pirate ship that was the Chicken of the Sea restaurant. Now they tied that in with Captain Hook and Peter Pan. But it's actually sponsored by the Chicken of the Sea tuna.
I see that.
Yeah, I forgot I had a picture of that. I'm always gathering pictures right up till we go on.
Yeah, you're a machine, man. That's for sure.
Well, I put as much into these as I do with all my original stuff that I create.
So good.
I want people to know what it was like. That was the dedication of Fantasyland. I guess I didn't have it numbered at the beginning, but
okay.
And then I think there's another folder in there too, isn't there? I think there's two.
Theater and
do the theater
Klein.
first.
Yeah, okay.
Then I'll do Tiny Klein.
All right, fire away.
The Mickey Mouse Club 3D Theater was there from 1955 to 1963, and it was called the 3D Jamboree. Was the film? They did a special film with the Mouseketeers and Jimmy Dodd, and they have his name misspelled there. I think that's kind of interesting.
Oh wow.
And it had Roy Williams. It was the Musketeer. And they had played two 3D cartoons. It was Working for Peanuts with Donald Duck, and there was Adventures in Music, Melody. And they renamed the theater the Fantasyland Theater in 1964. And then in 1983, it was tore out, and that's where Pinocchio's Daring Journey is today.
I love this.
It was.
Air conditioned.
Well, that was a big deal then too.
Yeah.
Walt Studio was one of the first places to be air conditioned when it was built. The one he built with the profits from Snow White. That's the theater in the background. That's why I had that picture there. But you can see where the teacups were in front.
It feels like, because I've never been to Disneyland, it feels like Disneyland is much more on top of itself as opposed to Disney World.
It's smaller.
Yeah.
Disney World's more spread out. Even when they built rides at Disneyland that started in Disney World, the rides had to be scaled down. Like Big Thunder Mountain and Space Mountain, they're built smaller at Disneyland than they are at Disney World.
I bet.
But it was really a ma and pa kind of park. It's not like what you think of it today as this big global conglomeration. It was just a little tiny ma and pa park up until Eisner took over. And then that's when it started growing to be this out of control monster. The Tiny Klein folder. Tiny Klein was a 71-year-old, 4-foot, 10-inch tall woman that was a circus performer that Walt hired to be the original Tinkerbell. They would fly her over the park during the fireworks. Now, this is where
how tall was she again?
4'11". He first met her. She did the live action footage for the fairy godmother in Cinderella, and that's where that came from. But there she is. People probably didn't realize there was this old broad flying around as Tinkerbell. I had to put that word in there, my favorite word. She was a Hungarian immigrant. She met her husband in vaudeville, and he was a circus performer, so she became a circus performer. And she was real famous at the turn of the century for doing daredevil feats with horses. And she did this thing called the Slide of Death, and she even did it over Times Square. And that's what she did as Tinkerbell over Disneyland. And she was retired and nothing to do, and that's why Walt offered her to play Tinkerbell. And she agreed. And for the next 3 years, she rode the bus to Disneyland till the day she died to fly over the audience. And she was doing this since she was like 74.
Wow.
Flying over Disneyland. And when she was asked about it, she said she wasn't afraid to do that over the Disneyland, but she was afraid to ride in a car on the freeways because they're not safe.
Okay.
Is next up Tomorrowland?
Yeah, Tomorrowland. That's our last of the main lands that are still there.
Okay.
And it has the most attractions that have been removed because Tomorrowland was always the hardest part of the park to design because the future is always changing.
Right.
And when they first built Tomorrowland, it was supposed to be the year 1986 because that was the year Halley's Comet was next due to appear. And it did. I remember when I was a kid, it came through and we all went out to my grandparents' farm. We all looked at the telescope to see it, but I didn't see it. That's just to show he was interested in rockets or anything. It was the educational part of the
park.
The
amazing thing about Walt is that not only was he so interested in the past, but equally interested in the future.
Yeah.
It was such a unique individual in that he was both forward looking and backward looking.
And I think that was a secret to why the things were successful as they were. That's not there today. Now, what you're looking at there, that's the clock of the world and displays the correct time for all 24 time zones at the same time.
That is a cool clock.
I love the nostalgia look of that, retro.
Oh, so cool.
And there was at the time there were a row of flags for all 48 states because when they opened there were only 48. They added up to 50. I don't know if that's still there anymore, but there's a picture of that as well. One of the things go through that main folder because that's at the end.
Oh, what have I done here?
Oh, you went into one of the folders.
Did I skip the
Tomorrowland has all those pictures.
What happened here? Hang on. I don't know. I'll catch up to you. Hang on. You keep talking.
Okay. Well, I mentioned last time there was that Circle-Rama camera that Bob Iwerks invented. He invented it for Tomorrowland, and they showed different films, but they were all films showing America. There was the America the Beautiful and American Journeys, and they kept updating the films. So most of these things we have pictures of. They opened with the Hall of Aluminum Fame, and they got an aluminum company to sponsor this exhibit, and it had everything in the place was built with aluminum. That's the Hall of Chemistry. That was there till 1966. That taught how chemicals were used in modern living. There was the
Monsanto was in there.
Monsanto, also that house that you skipped ahead to, they built that as well. That was the house of the future. But they were involved with building Disneyland, Monsanto.
Wow.
Those are the Phantom boats. They were there for only a few months because they were too costly to run. They had high maintenance. And I have several pictures of those there. And that's the spaceman that used to be the mascot for Tomorrowland when they opened. There's also a woman there. I'll have another photo of them coming up, but they look like something out of Flash Gordon. There's on the left there. She's got a cape. I tried to find it, but when I was a kid, I remember there was vintage footage of the spaceman flying with like 2 aerosol cans, but I couldn't find a photo of that to put in our presentation. Now, other things they had there when they opened, they had a dairy bar, and guests would learn that happy cows produce better milk, and they had a flying milkman from the future. At the end of the ride, you got a glass of ice cold milk. Oh, we're right there now. I have a photo of the milkman. Yeah, there he is, the milkman of the future. He's holding him there, the model. And we don't even have milkmen anymore. And where they always talk about how Star Trek didn't think of like a cell phone, but they have all that the computer and all that stuff. Well, that's milkmen of the future. They had the rocket to the moon, and that became later after we'd been to the moon. It became Mission to Mars. They had the Astro Jets, the rocket jets, the Astro Orbiter. They kept changing the names. The Moonliner rocket, and that's what that is there. And they changed the cars. I noticed in some of the photos the cars are different shape. So it must have been from one of the updates. Yeah, there's different cars there.
Oh wow, they just keep changing.
Well, they have to keep updating it. Now that circle in the foreground, that's where we're going to go to next. That is the flight circle, and people used to come there with model planes, race cars, and speedboats, and they would play with them there.
What was that?
Those are the sky buckets that used to go over the theme park.
I love those, man. I love.
But the cars got updated because when they opened the Matterhorn, the cars aren't shaped like that anymore. That's the people mover. And that transportation system Walt saw that in the Ford motor plant and it was used to transfer hot metal ingots away from the assembly line, and Walt decided to use the same system for that. And they use that same system of the People Mover in many of the rides. That's the bathroom of the future.
Oh.
I don't understand what's going on there, though, because if that's the bathroom of the future, I just see a shower there.
Yeah.
Now that's the flying saucers. Those were there from 1961 to 66. Those were like bumper cars, but they were flying saucers. And it had
powered. Are there air underneath?
There's air underneath it. That's one reason they quit having it there. It took like 24 people to start this ride up in the morning. And if you weighed too much, you wouldn't move. If you didn't weigh enough, you wouldn't move. And I'm surprised it lasted 5 years. It just had constant breakdowns. And it eventually became the Tomorrowland stage. Well, that's where they put the Tomorrowland stage. I just find all this fascinating where these were there and they're not anymore. But that ride, they didn't replace it with another ride. So people were always asking, when are you going to bring this ride back? Well into the 90s, they were asking this. People remembered riding this. That's the Tomorrowland stage there. And that was there from 1967 to 1977. And on July 20th, 1969, it was filled to capacity to watch the moon landing live.
Wow.
They also had when Star Wars opened, there's the People of the Future there. I think that's interesting too, just as Flash Gordon. Now, in that stage in the 70s, they also had a band inspired by Star Wars characters that played there. They weren't Star Wars characters, they were the Disney version. I didn't get any photos of that, but I just remembered that I'd seen a documentary about that during COVID on YouTube. There's a documentary about this band and everything, the people that were in it. It only lasted that one summer, but everybody remembers them.
So here's the house I accidentally skipped to.
That's okay. That was built by Monsanto. That's the House of the Future. And it was there from 1957 to 67. Everything in it's made of plastic, and the house itself was made of plastic. And you just keep skipping through there. And I've got pictures of it to show this is indeed at Disneyland. There aren't any photos of the inside except one I could find. And when they were building it, it was top secret. And they wouldn't let Walt's wife inside, so Walt fired the security guard for that because he figured if he was rude to Walt and his wife, he'd be more rude to the customers.
Yeah.
And when they tore it down with the wrecking ball just bounced off the sides. They had to tear it down piece by piece.
And that's the only inside photo we have.
That's the only inside photo I could find. It's the bathroom.
Wow.
Now there's a book on it, but I don't have the book, so I'm sure there's some inside photos on that. The book just came out last year.
Okay.
About the House of the Future. I think the next one is the Autotopia, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. This was written, and this was in Tomorrowland because the freeway system was brand new at the time. And it was originally going to be called Freeways of Tomorrow. And it was to showcase how freeways are built. And there's Walt with his daughter and one of his grandchildren. That's Danny Kaye there, the actor Danny Kaye, not our Danny Kaye that's in the comments. But I thought that was kind of interesting. When you say Danny Kaye on the show, I always think of that Danny Kaye.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought that was funny. I found that on an accident. I wasn't looking for Danny Kaye in a photo, but he was friends with Walt. Walt considered him to be in Mary Poppins as the Dick Van Dyke character.
Midget Autopia.
Yeah, I saw that after I found the photo. We can't say that word anymore.
Wow, that's fun.
And the next folder there is Adventures Through Inner Space. And this was a concept of Walt's, but it didn't open until 1967. He had the Sherman Brothers write a song for it called Miracles from Molecules. And I guess that's in some of the Marvel Ant-Man movies. They used that song instrumentally. And it was the first attraction to use the Omnimover system. And because the people, this is the late 60s, this opened, and people would get a little frisky in there because it was like a tunnel of love kind of thing. So Roy had Ub Iwerks design a camera system to keep track of people in the ride. So if they were caught doing naughty things in the ride, they would get ejected.
Oh my goodness.
But you think this was probably the first closed camera system that's in all the department stores and places you see today. Ub Iwerks first developed it for this ride. It was to keep people from, getting it on in the Adventures Through Inner Space. Well, they called it amongst themselves in the park. They called it Adventures Through Intercourse because of things that went on in there. And I don't mean to be crude, but I thought that was interesting because they brought that that's why we have the closed circuit camera system, is because of that.
Wow.
And that system they used to travel that people through there, Disneyland built that for the George Bush International Airport in Texas. That's the only time Disney ever built something outside of Disneyland for somebody else. And today, man, when they redid Tomorrowland, they redid it in '67. And that was under Walt's plans. They did it again in the '80s. Now it's all environmental wackoism, all that stuff. The plants, you're edible. And now Tomorrowland is the future that never was. It's not the future we can have.
So are we at
Holiday Land? This is the only land that no longer exists at Disneyland. The original concept of Hollywood Land or Holiday Land, it was turn of the century town park with a picnic area, horseshoe pits, a baseball diamond, and it had an open air circus.
Okay.
And this is the circus. And the Disneyland Mickey Mouse Club circus was only there for a couple months because people didn't want to go to a circus within a circus. And Walt really wanted this circus there. Because he grew up, that's one of those nostalgic things. The circus itself is gone today because of the woke stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when the circus left, that tent was refurbished to have the picnic area larger. And the dirt that's underneath it was made from the dirt that was dug up to dig the moat for Sleeping Beauty's castle. Mm-hmm. And this was situated between Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. And there was a support there for the Magic Skyway for the little buckets going through. All of the circus things that were used there, the circus equipment and everything, Walt used those in a film called Toby Tyler. And I have a photo of the poster there too. There's Jimmy and Roy there. Jimmy Dodd and Roy Williams from the Mickey Mouse Club. Because you can't have too many photos of them because they're forgotten today. I think that was a pin back. And you can see that this was the tie-in thing. You would go to the circus. They would give you, you'd buy a souvenir book. When I was a kid, you got a coloring book at the Barnum Bailey Circus when you went. And they did a Viewmaster of it. But I mean, it was only there for like 6 weeks. It was just there from Thanksgiving to a little after New Year's, 1955.
Man, I miss that viewfinder thing you showed there. I loved those things. Look at that.
Oh, me too. Yeah. And I don't even know if they make those anymore.
I don't know.
When I was a kid, I remember they had the talking one. I didn't have one, but I remember the commercial on TV, the talking viewfinder. That's from the movie Toby Tyler, and a lot of the equipment and animals and everything for that, they were from Walt Disney Circus. And then I think the next folder in there has the picture of it as a picnic ground.
Yeah.
That the hill there that was built from the dirt from the moat, it was called they called it Holiday Hill. They later changed it to Snow Hill because what went there now is the Matterhorn. But Walt wanted to have one part of his land was originally going to be called Circus Land, and that didn't work out, so it became Holiday Land. And that Holiday Land eventually closed down to make the Matterhorn. There were a lot of different playground things there, but that was the only one I could find a photo of. Each one had a theme of the different lands in Disneyland. And that's just like an introduction of what it was there. And one of the reasons they got rid of it was this hill there to put the Matterhorn in is because it became a lover's lane area. After they closed Holiday Land, people were going behind the dirt where they couldn't be seen and fooling around back there. And someone was growing marijuana on the top of Holiday Hill.
Wow.
Now, Disneyland had an expansion in 1959. And these are some photos of when it was announced what they were going to build there. And you just scan on through those. The monorail, the Matterhorn were two of the things they built for this. We have folders on each one. And the submarine ride was the third thing. That's yeah. I wondered if you were going to recognize him.
And I found Dick Nixon there too.
Yeah, I didn't know that was Clint Eastwood till I found the photo. Because there's no thing underneath it. That's Clint Eastwood, but I recognized him.
How incredible is that? I mean, that's a cool photo. A young Richard Nixon and a young Clint Eastwood together.
And when we get to the monorail, I have another Richard Nixon story because Richard Nixon triggers the woke historians.
Oh boy, should we go to Matterhorn?
Matterhorn first. We'll just go right on through in order there.
Okay.
The Matterhorn they got put in there because Walt vacation in Switzerland. There was this movie they were making, Third Man on the Mountain, and that's what it's tied into. But nobody knows the film Third Man on the Mountain. But that was the first attraction like that tied in with one of the live action movies. The saying Third Man on the Mountain is when you're climbing a mountain, sometimes you feel like there's a third man there. That's Harriet Burns. She was one of the Imagineers, but again, there's a woman that worked for Walt that was very high up in his organization, but we're told he's a sexist. That's the model of the Matterhorn, and she built the model. And I don't know if that's the scale with the castle there, what it ended up being. But what Walt ended up doing, he was going to build a little tiny hill, but when he was over for Third Man on the Mountain, he sent a postcard of the Matterhorn back to the Imagineers. And he wrote on the back, "Build this." And so they built this 1/100th scale of the Matterhorn Mountain. And these photos are what it looked like when they were building it. And they had to get special clearances from Anaheim to build it because it's 147 feet tall. They used enough lumber to build 27 1950s era tract homes to build the structure underneath. That's all concrete that makes the mountain shape.
Wow. Look at that.
And that's also built in forced perspective. Now there's a basketball court in the top of the Matterhorn for the employees. And I have several photos of that.
Wow. I'm reading all of this.
Oh, that's fine. I'll just keep going through what I got here. This was the Matterhorn was the first roller coaster to use tubular steel in the world, and it allows for loops and corkscrews through the Matterhorn. There's 2 different tracks. Walt didn't want to wait till the track was finished, so he had the Imagineers pile bales of hay at the end of the track so he could ride through the Matterhorn before it was finished. And he liked it so much, he wanted them to have something like that at the end of the ride. So that's why there's a splashdown at the end of the ride. But that is, you think of it as an urban legend. There's a basketball court at the top of the Matterhorn. Well, there is, because here's photos to prove it. And the employees would go up there and play on their breaks. I don't know if it's still there now, but it was at one time. There's a Yeti in the Matterhorn, and that was supposed to be there from the beginning, but they decided they couldn't get it done in time to open. So Walt shelved it. But then when they opened Space Mountain in the 70s, they decided to put the Yeti into the ride. But they'd already built the Yeti, so it already existed. And we have a photo of the Yeti coming up here, and the Yeti has a name, and his name is Harold. That is the Shah. That last picture was the Shah of Iran. I guess they're there too. That's the Shah of Iran and the Queen of Iran. And you remember the ones that got disposed, and now we have the Ayatollah there. But there's other photos. There's the Yeti.
Oh yeah, and then he makes another appearance over at I think it's Animal Kingdom, right?
I think that's a different Yeti, but okay. some of the stuff they did for this ride went into that ride at Animal Kingdom. I've never been to Animal Kingdom because that wasn't built when I was there.
Look at that right there, how it goes through.
And when Walt was looking to build that, he was told he could not build a Matterhorn mountain like that and have that skyway go through it. But now the skyway's gone. And you see the buckets are different than those silver ones that were in the Tomorrowland photos.
I love it.
Okay. Submarines are next. And Walt built these based on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but he also believed in nuclear energy, nuclear subs. The first nuclear sub was named the Nautilus because Walt's film popularized that term again.
Hang on. So we're going to skip monorail and go to submarines?
Yeah, we'll go to submarines and I'll go to the monorail.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I got them in a different order on my paper here.
Oh, good.
The submarine ride, what that's supposed to be is the first trip to the North Pole that in real life. It was a trip to the North Pole. But to make it fun, Walt added a giant squid, mermaids, the city of Atlantis, the sea serpent. He had to clear with the city to build the submarines because there were no laws in the books for underwater vessels. It was the first e-ticket ride. There's 8 submarines there, and that made Walt the commander of the world's 8th largest submarine fleet. And I told the crew chief story before. In the 1960s, they had live actresses play mermaids that would set out on the rocks there. and they got rid of them eventually because the chemical in the water made their actresses ill, and men would swim out in the water to get photos with mermaids. And this original ride was shut down in 1998 because of the maintenance, and they did a ceremony with Donald Duck as the resident sailor where they lowered the banner and they gave it to Donald, because that's what you do when you retire a ship. You lower the banner and you give it to the resident admiral. And they reopened it in 2007. They changed the diesel submarines to electric. They themed it with Finding Nemo. And now those are the mermaids, and I have several pictures of the mermaids because they were only there for a few.
Chemical situation in the water?
It had chlorine and some other things in the water, and it dyed their hair. And you can see some of them have bleached blonde hair. And they said it made them sick.
Oh, gosh.
Well, the 50s and 60s were a different time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened with any of these mermaids. Now, I know
that's what I'm wondering, if they had long-term help.
In Florida, there's mermaids they had a mermaid restaurant. It wasn't Disney, it was someone else, but that was a famous thing. Now that's a tentacle from the giant squid from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He made that part of an exhibit. For the monorail, that replaced the Viewliner, and Walt put that in 1957, the Viewliner, but what he really wanted was the monorail. The Viewliner was only there for a year and a half. Walt learned of the monorail when he was in Germany in one of his films, and it just happened to go by when he was driving down the road. He went and chased down where this originated from, and he found the headquarters of the monorail company, and he made a deal to get the monorail built at Disneyland. There's Nixon. It was the first monorail built in the Western Hemisphere. It opened in 1959. How he got Nixon involved in this is there was a restaurant in California. It was run by Nixon's brother, and Walt liked the bean soup there. And Walt had a conversation with his brother. Could you get your brother Richard to help open the monorail, be at the ceremony? And that's how Nixon got to be at the monorail opening ceremony. Nixon was the first official passenger of the monorail, and that was the first time it ever successfully went around the track for the monorail, because every time they went around the track before that, the friction would start fires.
Oh, gosh.
But then, that when I see the monorail, I think of Disney World, because that goes from the hotel right to the park. But I never stayed in the hotel when we went both times. And I was a little kid in the early 80s, and then a teenager in the 90s, we stayed at Fort Wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I saw my first armadillo. I was coming back from the showers, and something was shaking the bushes and hissing, and I thought it was a snake or something. And then here comes this giant rat in the turtle shell across the road. I didn't know that they could hiss and rattle like that. I think the Tiki Room's next, I think, right?
I got audio
animatronics, but that's going to go into the Tiki Room. Yeah.
Okay.
The audio animatronics, that started because Walt was interested in models. When he was in Europe, he bought this caged bird toy from the 1850s, and he brought it back to the studio, and he asked the guys at the studio to figure out how it worked. Now, that's Buddy Epson. That's the next part of the story.
Sorry. Keep going on this.
Oh, that's okay. He just had him tear it apart to figure out how it worked. So when he was building those little model houses, he wanted to have people in the houses. So he wanted to make little mechanical people. So this is Buddy Epson, and this is before he was in Davy Crockett. And Buddy Epson worked in vaudeville, and this was called Project Little Man. He had Buddy Epson do this dance, and he had the Imagineers try to replicate the dance with a miniature figure with gimbals and wires. And there's the Project Little Man. There's the figure there. And the intent for that was before Disneyland. He was going to have all those little model places of the scenes in his films. And he wanted to have little people in them acting out the scenes. And the animatronics became the Bird and Mary Poppins. You don't think of that. That was the first animatronic in a film. But that came after the Chanatika Room. That's what we're going to get to in our next folder. But I think I've got 2 folders of her there with the bird. But she's got wires going up her arm there to keep that bird moving.
Is that right?
If you watch the film, that's why her arm is always held that way.
Interesting.
But that was the first animatronic. And that was something that Walt had in common with Jim Henson, that they were interested in things like that. Because Jim Henson is who really got into animatronics with doing wireless animatronics. He started that with Emmett Otter's Jug Bag Christmas, and then Fraggle Rock. This is the Chanatika Room. It was originally going to be a restaurant, and Walt looked at the picture there with the birds up in the top there. And he says, you can't have birds in a restaurant because the birds would crap in everyone's food. So this is why they invented the animatronic birds. And they had the Sherman Brothers write the music, the Chanticleer River song. The skin they used on the birds, with Harriet Burns saw Walt always wearing a vest. He's in some of the photos we'll have in some of these upcoming things. He's always wearing this vest, and it was made out of cashmere, and they used the skin to make the skin of the birds. And Wally Bogue was the voice of the main bird, Jose, and he co-wrote the script. And it opened in 1963. It had 225 animatronics. And they redid it in the 90s with Iago and Zazu running the Chantiki room. Till then, Chantiki room caught on fire, and now that's not there anymore. There's a truncated version of the show now, I guess.
Yeah.
I have that hum again. I don't know if you can hear a hum now.
I am not hearing a hum. Is anybody else hearing a hum?
It just appeared.
Huh.
So the next one here is the World's Fair. And this is where he had things he was doing at Disneyland, and he paused them to focus on the World's Fair because he got companies to fund the development of the auto animatronics.
Well, let me see here. Is this let me just make sure before we keep going. Let me make sure that this is where you want me, because did we do these photos here? I've already done these.
Yeah, we did those.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did those.
Yeah, that was 59.
All right. You keep going. I'll catch up.
Well, with the World's Fair, Walt had corporations fund all these attractions for the World's Fair, and they don't do World's Fairs anymore. But that was a staple in American history. The 1939 World's Fair was before World War II, and that was always seen as like the end of an era. And 64 people that went there say it was like the end of an era.
Hang on a second. So in the
just go through order.
Well, just
there's
hang on
4
a
of
second.
them there, right?
Let me just make sure that I'm in the right folder here, sir. I am looking in the expansions folder.
Yeah, expansions, and then there's one for the World's Fair.
Okay, I'm just not seeing World's Fair, unfortunately.
Maybe it's number 2.
Main Street? No,
Main Street is it's still in the expansion folder.
Okay. Well, I'm going to catch up as best I can, but I'm just not seeing what you're referring to.
In the expansion folder, there's like 9 folders of different things they added.
Okay, I got it now. Carousel of Progress. That's where you want me.
Carousel of Progress.
I got you now.
And this was sponsored by General Electric. And originally, Walt was going to have a land in Disneyland called Edison Square, but a lot of the ideas for it went into the Carousel of Progress. It was supposed to celebrate all the things the electricity and discovery have done for mankind. And they ended up putting it into a ride. The Sherman Brothers wrote a song for that, and that became the anthem of Imagineering. And they eventually moved it to Disney. All these rides got moved to Disney World after the World's Fair. And the woke complain about this one because they don't like the scenes in the past where the wife is doing all the work around the house. But what the Carousel of Progress was showing was back then there weren't all these conveniences where like you had to churn your own butter and things like that. Now you go to the store and you can buy butter. But back then you had to make your own thread, make your own cloth. And that's what the Carousel of Progress was showing, that technology through the years made it so you could spend more family time together. And that's what Walt liked about that ride. That's a model of the ride mock-up there that he did to show the executives at General Electric. And what's interesting about this is the same year that General Electric was doing this with Walt Disney, they also sponsored Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer for Rankin Bass. So that was going, and Burl Ives was also in a movie for Walt in 1964, as well as the voice of Sam the Snowman in Rudolph. So there's a Christmas connection there.
Shall we go to dinosaurs?
Yeah, dinosaurs. That was called the Magic Skyway, and it was sponsored by the Ford Motor Company. And the concept was you sat in a latest Ford motor car, and you went through time back to the time of the dinosaurs. And Walt built dinosaurs and cavemen for this ride. And after the fair, the dinosaurs were added to his train diorama, and it was called the Primeval World. And some of the other animatronics were used in other rides. Some of them were stripped of their skins. There's a mammoth that was on this ride, and it was changed into an elephant for the Jungle Cruise. And that ride's at Epcot, or it was. And my story with that is when I was a kid, when I was like 4 years old, I went to Epcot. And I hid under the seat because I was afraid the dinosaurs were going to eat me.
It's understandable.
My mom always tells that story. All I remember is hiding. I still remember hiding under the seat. So, but that's based on Fantasia, the dinosaur scene in Fantasia. That's where you'll see a lot of the scenes in that ride were from Fantasia. And I don't know if it's still at Epcot, but that's where it existed after they tore it out of Disneyland. I don't know if that was the actual one they moved there, because Carousel of Progress they moved over to Disney World. But these are all from the World's Fair photos. Those aren't from the Disneyland one, because that was how it was originally done. Walt wasn't happy with the way the caveman looked, so they weren't in Disneyland when he moved the ride to Disneyland. They redid them. But one of their videos we have, it's where they're building all these attractions for the World's Fair. One of the videos I linked to is an episode of Walt's show. And you can see how they planned this and build it and everything. He interacts with the dinosaur.
Lincoln?
Lincoln, we touched on Lincoln before, but what I have here about Lincoln, because he's part of the World's Fair too, sponsored by the state of Illinois. And he malfunctioned once at the World's Fair, and he flipped off the audience.
Wow. How does that happen?
I don't know. Because it took hours to program every movement in Lincoln. And he was originally supposed to be part of the Hall of Presidents. That's Walt was going to build the Hall of Presidents. And when they actually did build the Hall of Presidents, Walt had recorded a lot of that audio himself back in the 50s. And we talked about that in an earlier show, the Hall of Presidents. But also when they built the Hall of President, when they put Lincoln in Disneyland, Walt also purchased a 16-foot replica of the Capitol that was hand carved from cane and stone by a man who looked like his dad. It took him 3.5 years, and that's Walt with his friend dressed as Lincoln there. I just moved our Lincoln folder over to this one just because Lincoln was part of the World's Fair.
Okay. Good stuff. Okay.
And when the Carousel of Progress, by the way, it became America Sings when they moved it out of Disneyland, and we talked about that in an earlier show too.
And as we go to this next folder, I will go ahead and apologize in advance to everyone who will now have this song in your head as we move into the Small World folder.
Now that was funded by. Now this only took 9 months to build. It's the fastest built attraction from conception to being finished. And the song is known as the Insane Asylum, and they call the ride the Asylum among the employees. Now, one of the stories about this, it was funded by UNICEF, the United Nations, and Pepsi-Cola. That's why the original concept was all the kids were going to sing their own home national anthems, but it sounded like a cacophony of noise. So you had the Sherman Brothers write the song. And the Sherman Brothers were riding with Walt in a car, and they said to Walt they wanted to donate the copyright to a children's charity. And Walt swerved the car over the side of the road, and he got his finger in their face, and he told them that their copyright is their birthright, and their children will live off the money made from this song and all this stuff. But I always tie that back to what happened to Walt with Oswald, with the copyright getting stolen from him. And that's why copyright was so important when they started with Mickey Mouse and everything they did after that. And because it's in every theme park, that Small World song is always playing somewhere in every place in the world. It's never silent. So whoever can hear everything going on Earth, they're always hearing "It's a Small World." And when you're the only country on Small World that's not there is the United States, because you're standing in the United States. And when they build it in other lands, that like in Japan's the only country not on Small World. So that's another interesting thing about Small World.
Okay.
New Orleans. New Orleans Square is next. And New Orleans Square, this is where Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion are, but the place is called New Orleans Square. And Walt started building this in the 50s he paused building on it, construction, because he wanted to focus on the World's Fair. It's 3 stories beneath it. There's offices, a main kitchen area for all the employees. Walt and Roy were going to have apartments above the Pirates of the Caribbean. They built them there, but Walt died, so he didn't get to move in. All the balconies in New Orleans Square are made out of rubber instead of metal, so they won't rust. New Orleans Square is where Club 33 is. This is Louis Armstrong there. And there's a another lie going around that King Louis in the Jungle Book is named King Louis because of Louis Armstrong and racism and all this stuff. But King Louis is in the Jungle book. And Louis Armstrong actually wanted to be King Louis. I got personally told this by Floyd Norman in one of his posts. And Walt didn't use King Louis. He used Louis Prima. Louis Prima was Hispanic, I think. But they lie and say that the Jungle Book was racist. And Louis Prima had a background with Disney. Like I showed those albums he did. This show we've linked to in our links is Disneyland After Dark. And he's one of the people that are there playing music on the Mark Twain riverboat. People don't realize Louis Armstrong was a big star at the time. People probably don't know who he was now. And the Club 33 is also in New Orleans Square. And the reason it's limited to 487 members is because that's the fire capacity if they're all there at one time. It has nothing to do with Illuminati or Freemasons. We covered that in an earlier show too, but I didn't have that part of it in there.
Did you want me to click on the pirates here?
Yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean is next. And originally Walt wanted to do a wax museum when he was going to build this in the 1950s. And they constructed the wax museum of foundations out of steel in 1961. But after the World's Fair, he wanted to do animatronics. And so all that was tore out. Now, Mark Davis designed all these characters. He was the one that did Chanticleer and Renard and got moved over to Imagineering after that. And he designed a lot of the ride characters and things that happened after that. But you recognize all, I put the drawings there because you'll recognize all these characters are in the ride.
Absolutely.
When they built the ride, they realized that the fake skeletons look fake. So they got real skeletons from the UCA Medical Center to be in that ride. So it's real dead people in that ride. Now this is all removed now, the bridal auction. And I have a little story to say about that as we go through these. That's the auctioneer there from the final ride. That's the redhead. She's been changed now to a gun runner. But Mark Davis had a story about her. She became a pirate. And just keep clicking through there. You'll see a painting of what she looked like as a pirate a few years afterwards, where she was married after she was married to the pirate. She enjoyed it. And she became a bigger pirate than he was. And that's the painting. And they tore that out because they said it was too racy for Disney, but Walt approved it. But now she's replaced as a gun runner. But I thought that was a more interesting story that she became a pirate. And, you know, she out-pirated the guy that she married. And that's all based on real pirates. And that's her as the gun runner on the current ride there. But this was all addressed at the time. That's painted on the ride there, but that's supposed to be one of them is the redhead. But that there were the pirate and Bonnie and everything. This is another joke about it. There were some of the women in the ride. They were chasing after the pirates, and the pirates didn't want to be married.
All right.
And it's not supposed to be history. It's supposed to be entertaining. It's funny.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the song, they said the pirates sing about over 20 different unsavory acts that they do. They're not heroes.
Mm-hmm.
But none of this is there now because it's all been replaced. Well, a lot of it's not there now. It's been replaced by Johnny Depp and the characters from the movie. But one of the videos we have, it shows opening day of the Pirates of the Caribbean, and you can see all this, what it was like. And it has the bridal auction there, and the pirates being the rascals that they were, and everything. But that they did that as a boat system because of Small World. That pirate's been censored as well, because in the original version, he's talking about looking for a girl in a barrel, and now he's talking about eating a sandwich. This is the drawing, and then next I have the animatronics that they built. That's what inspired it.
Good stuff.
I mean, that ride's been the ride that's been seen by more people even than Small World, they say.
Oh, wow.
Even though it's been changed. Haunted Mansion. Okay. But when you go in there, the first one I think is Museum of the Weird.
Yes. Okay.
Now this was the original concept, and the guy who built it, he designed it. His name was Raleigh Crump, and he was originally an animator that moved over to Imagineering. And there's some photos of him, so you can see what he looked like at the time. And he also designed a kinetic sculpture that was at the World's Fair in front of Small World, called something like the Sculpture of the Four Winds, something like that. But some of that, that's what the model of it looked like. And there's a movie Walt made with Dick Van Dyke where there's some of these things in the movie, and he designed those as well. It was called I can't remember now. It was on the tip of my tongue. But Dick Van Dyke was in. It came out after Walt died. The original concept of this was going to be the Museum of the Weird, like a Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of a thing. And the other Imagineers said, this stuff is too weird. Walt's not going to like it. So when they did this stuff, the day to show everything off for the Haunted Mansion to Walt, they stuck him off in the corner, and they tried to usher Walt out of the room. But then Walt caught out. This was in the back of the room. He walked over and started looking at it, and he asked him what this was. And he just kept telling him, Raleigh, this stuff's really weird. And so the next morning, Raleigh came in at 7 a.m. early to start early, and he found Walt sitting there in the clothes that he was there in the day before. And Walt said, Raleigh, you SOB, I couldn't sleep all night because of all that stuff you showed me the day before. And Raleigh started to apologize, and Walt said, no, I got an idea of what we're going to do. We're going to open a Museum of the Weird. And originally the Haunted Mansion was going to empty out into this Museum of the Weird where there were all these characters and just weird objects like the chair that there's pictures of there. It was going to talk to people and things like that. But you can see how strange this stuff is.
Yeah.
Raleigh said he was going to pull back on being weird, and Walt told him, no, you just keep doing what you're doing. I'll be the one that pulls it back so it's acceptable to mainstream culture. And this wagon all came to life with the animatronics if they'd built it. But when Walt died, they didn't build. That's a man made a candle man. That's what that was. A picture. That. Yeah. But there was a drawing of him as well. There was a comic book that came out about 10 years ago, the Museum of the Weird, that was inspired by this, but Raleigh didn't have anything to do with the story or anything. Mm. But this is supposed to be the most legendary attraction that was not built at Disneyland. Mm. That's Raleigh there. He only died a year or two ago. And that's a knockoff of the Country Bear Jamboree, because he left Disney and did that. When they were doing the Haunted Mansion, one of the things that he did was Raleigh Crump there. He linked up the all the animatronics they were building for the Haunted Mansion up in the Imagineering area, and first they got told that they had to leave the lights on at the end of the day because the cleaning people were too freaked out by all the ghosts and things in the warehouse. So what Raleigh did with another Imagineer, they rigged it all up to go off if somebody touched the light, like motion sensor. And the next day when they came in, they found a mop in the middle of the room. And a little later, they got a call from personnel. You clean your own space from now on.
That's funny. That's good.
Well, they all have these people had senses of humor. You can't do that these days.
Okay, Haunted Mansion time.
Yeah, yeah. I have a lot of the drawings for that here. Now, one thing they learned with when they were doing the mold for Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, when they had the rubber inside out from the mask, they found out that it would looked like it was watching you around across the room. So that got used in the Haunted Mansion, that technology. Wow. Walt Disney had always wanted to put in the original plans of Disneyland, it was called the Spook House. And he was always going to build this thing. And he built the facade in 1963. And coming up, I'll have the sign there that they put out that they were out collecting the ghosts. That's why they hadn't built the Haunted Mansion yet. Mm-hmm. They just had the facade there. The story is that it's a retirement home for ghosts. This character was in the ride, but pulled out, and they put him back in. I have more photos of him coming up, so that's okay. Okay. The Hatbox Ghost. That's the paintings, what they look like when they're all down. I think Mark Davis designed those. He did design more paintings that aren't even in the ride. They'd never put them in. Because there's always more that goes into it than
right
gets built. You know,
it's almost like you have like when you record a music album, right? You got B-sides, you got leftovers.
It's like putting these shows together. There's a lot of notes we don't get to.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Not the. I just waiting for it to come up. The organ that's in there, that's the actual organ from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That's Captain Nemo's organ when we get it up there. And people don't realize that's an actual movie prop. That's the original concept for the Hitchhiking Ghosts there. That's what they were originally going to look like. This is when they were building the Haunted Mansion. That's the sign saying that they're out. They have a retirement community for ghosts opening up. And they would like, if there's anyone that wants to spend their afterlife haunting people, and all the scares they want, they can come to Disneyland and live in the Haunted Mansion. I think that's a better concept than I didn't see the new movie they just made, but that one with Eddie Murphy. I think it's a better concept that the reason there are all these places in the world is because there are ghosts from all over the world. And ghosts were treated like fairies or leprechauns. They weren't actual dead people when they were originally building this. And that's kind of lost now. And one of the things I've linked to this week on Twitter, there's the commercials they used on the radio to advertise the Haunted Mansion, where there's a reporter going through the Haunted Mansion and he's interviewing the ghosts. That's what the original cast members were that opened the Haunted Mansion, that worked the ride. And the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland has a different structure than Disney World, the building. I had to put that in there because of the Song of the South. Bear's afraid to go in.
I see that.
See, that was the thing. That some of the Imagineers wanted it to be a scary ride. Some wanted it to be funny. And then when I said I don't care about what Disney does anymore, they started making merchandise based on the Haunted Mansion. That's the organ I mentioned. I'll get some of the merchandising from the Haunted Mansion because that's kind of something Walt built. That's what it looked like in the film. But that one, there really wasn't a ride like that. And that's the Hatbox Ghost. He was removed because the effect never worked, where his head disappeared and appeared in the Hatbox. You could always see the head in the Hatbox. But they put it back in recently because now they use projection techniques to work the Hatbox Ghost. But for years, it was like an urban legend. Now, Madame Leota there, she's played by an Imagineer named Leota Toombs, and that was her real name. And there's a photo of her coming up. And when they remodeled the ride, this is her working on several of the rides. She was one of the first Imagineers that was a woman there. And she died in the 90s. So then her daughter took over to play Madame Leota when they remodeled the ride. And there she is with the red. Now that's the daughter there. And there's a photo of the daughter after that. And she's also an Imagineer. And her daughter is an Imagineer now too. And the Haunted Mansion is called Gracie Manor, and that's because it's named after this Imagineer, and his name is Yale Gracie. And that's his tombstone at the Haunted Mansion. They have that, the in jokes with the things are named after the Imagineers. Master Gracie is master of the house because he was in charge of building the Haunted Mansion. And he always told a story when he was a kid. He went and stayed at a house with his cousins, and there was an old lady who lived in the closet who told stories. He told the mom about it, and they realized it was a ghost. And he swore it was a true story, but they never saw the old lady in the closet again. But I thought that was an interesting story. Do you want to do the Country Bears, or not enough time? Because I put them in there because it's your favorite.
Of course, yeah. Hang on, I'm just looking here. Yeah, let's finish the expansions here. So we've got several folders in here. So Country Bear, Space Mountain.
Yeah, I've only got 2 pages of expansions, and they're not full notes. They're just little pinpoints. The Country Bears. Now this was original. These pictures of the bears are going to show the drawings. This is Walt's Last Laugh. They were originally designed for an attraction. They were going to build a ski resort called Mineral King.
So am I in the Olympics thing or no?
Yeah, that's the Olympics. Okay. So that'll show you what Walt worked at. He did the pageantry for the Olympics. So this is what this is. And this inspired him to build a ski resort. He put a bid in to build a ski resort at Mineral King. There's pictures of what that would have been coming up here. But the Sierra Club and the environmentalists fought him on it. And then Walt died, so the company just backed off doing it. That's Walt at the Olympics there. That's Walt with his wife at the Olympics. This is him planning Mineral King. And that's what it would look like, the ski resort. The Country Bears were designed to be the show inside the ski resort.
Where would this have been built exactly?
I think it's Mineral King Mountain, something like that.
In California.
Yeah, it's in California, yeah. Okay. The Sierra Mountains and the Sierra Club. And that's Walt fighting with the environmentalists there. There's a recent book that came out on that, but I haven't read it yet. I have it now, but it's all about how Walt was going to build this, and then he died, so it didn't get built. And then they built the Country Bears, and he had Mark Davis work on it. Mark Davis, again, did Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion. Walt saw the drawing. This was originally going to just be animals, but then he decided to make it bears, Mark Davis. And there he is actually doing this artwork we're going to show. And when Walt saw the artwork here, this was the last time he came to the studio ever, and he laughed at it because he just thought it was hilarious, these bears. And that was the last time Mark Davis saw him. And They ended up moving them to Disneyland. They added this place called Critter Country after they removed Aunt Jemima's place. And the Country Bear Jamboree was there for almost 30 years. Then they changed it. They've changed it a couple times, and I guess they're going to change again what the Country Bear Jamboree is going to be. There's Big Al.
There's old Big Al.
I still say, he reminds me, you could hear Jeffy's voice coming out of that. I don't mean that as a slam at Jeffy. Just some people, you can marry voices with characters is all.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these people don't realize that the animatronics, they were designed as characters, just like any other Disney character.
That's a cool picture right there.
Mm-hmm. I have a 2-book set of, I'm not sure who that is, but that's all the Country Bears on the wall behind him. I have a 2-book set where it shows a lot of the designs Mark Davis came up with for different rides at Disneyland and Disney World and everything.
Blood on the saddle.
That's the album they put out at the time when it started. It got debuted at Disney World.
That was my favorite record growing up, man.
Mm-hmm.
Sure was. All right, what's up next? We've got Space Mountain.
Yep, Space Mountain. The Space Mountain was a ride that Walt wanted to design back in the 1950s, but the technology didn't exist yet to do it. So this is a Walt Disney idea. But it didn't get built till the late 70s. He wanted to have a spaceport and rocket flight. And that John Hench person we showed early on, he was the one that did these drawings. And it took them 12 years to where the technology got to where they could build this. And it opened in 1975. And at the opening ceremony were the Mercury astronauts, who were the first men on the moon. And Roy Sr.'s 84-year-old widow took a ride on this thing, and they weren't sure she should be on it. She's 84 years old. And when she got all done, she just had the time of her life, and she said her sister and her used to ride all the roller coasters. But, of course, that was 60 years ago. And it's 183 feet tall, 20 feet into the ground, and it's in proper proportion with the castle and the Matterhorn.
Oh, wow. Thunder Mesa?
Yep, that's next. Now, this one is a ride. The first part is a ride that they didn't build, the Western Expedition. Or do I have it numbered as 2? Okay, that's it. Now, Thunder Mountain was going to be part of this Thunder Mesa complex. You can see the mountain there on the right. Mm-hmm. And underneath it, there was going to be a ride that was going to be like a Western version of Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay.
And it had cowboys, Indians, masked banditos, high-kicking can-can girls. And they were going to put it in Walt Disney World when that opened. It was originally made for Disneyland. And it was so over budget, Disney World, they didn't build it when they opened it. But Roy Sr. thought it's just like one of his pet projects. You can just scan through it so we get you to where you need to go.
I see. That is cool, man.
Because these are some of the character concepts in the ride. And what ended up happening, why it didn't get built, was people were upset that the Pirates of the Caribbean didn't get built at Disney World when they first built it. Because this was going to be the version of Pirates of the Caribbean at Disney World. They weren't going to have pirates there. It was going to be this Western River Expedition. And so then the executives, after Roy died, they were like, why do we need 2 pirate rides? Then the energy crisis went up because of Carter and all that. So it didn't get built because of that. They figured this would have cost $60 million to build in 1970s dollars. So they pulled the plug, but some of the elements ended up in Epcot and in Euro Disney. But in Epcot, there's that I don't know if it's still there now, but inside that, the Earth there, the globe, there was a ride that went through history and invention and everything. And that's where some of these characters ended up there, some of the concepts. But this would have been a great ride. I would have loved this.
Yeah.
Because you think it would have been just like Pirates of the Caribbean. That's what it's really compared to.
Right. Yeah. A lot of character.
And then Mark Davis, because he'd been an animator, there's the bear with the picture. And some of this stuff, it was announced on maps of the parks before it got canceled.
Oh, wow. I bet those are worth something, huh?
Oh, I have a book that reprints some of that stuff.
That's
then
cool.
Big Thunder Railroad, it opened in 1979, but it was originally supposed to be part of that Thunder Mesa complex. And the story of that ride was there was a mining expedition in 1850, and they were warned the mountain was cursed. And the miners dynamited for the gold anyway, and the spirits in the mountain did away with all the miners. And that's why the train's a runaway train. That's the mountain in the background there. And
Boy, that's cool.
But it was a ride with a story, because that was one of the things Disney originated, was that they would have stories that told these rides. And so the whole thing with the mountain being cursed and the train was a runaway train because of a curse, that all came out of the storytelling.
Okay, next up is let's see,
Electrical Parade.
Yeah. Yep.
No, the Main Street Electrical Parade. That's one of the other signature things. Even though it was after Walt, I always think of that as being in the spirit of Walt. That came to Disneyland in 1972, because in 1971, when Disney World opened, they had the water pageant, and that's what the water pageant is there. And they would put these out on barges, and then Disneyland wanted one. But they don't have water, so they made it the Main Street Electrical Parade, and it has over 600,000 lights. And it ran until 1996, but now they keep bringing it back. I remember in 96, they were selling bulbs off the floats as souvenirs and things. And Michelle Pfeiffer started her acting career as the Alice in this parade.
Oh, wow.
And while you're showing those, I got another 70s story. Henry Kissinger when he wanted to disappear, he would sometimes go to Disneyland and wear a uniform and sell popcorn, and no one recognized him. This happened in the 70s. I don't have a photo of that, of course, but
wow. Let's see here. Lost Lands.
Yeah, these are the ones they didn't build. I've got my information on Liberty Street we didn't get to before.
Liberty Street. Okay.
Liberty Street he announced it in 1956. There's even a photo there from the park where it shows that it was coming in 56. It was on the maps. It was coming, and it was supposed to be an area of the park that celebrated the founding of America. The Hall of Presidents was going to be here. They were going to have the Liberty Bell going off all the time on the hour. And one of the attractions was going to be Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams writing the Declaration of Independence, like the animatronics. And some of that got put into the American Experience ride at Epcot in the 80s. And this all tied in with the movie Johnny Tremaine. That's why he made Johnny Tremaine, because he wanted people to remember how America got founded. And another thing that came out of this was they were going to do the Edison Square that I mentioned, and there was going to be an international street. And it was all going to be different. That's Disneyland there, where they were announcing they were going to build it, and they didn't build it. But part of that was because they built the World's Fair. And this is the layout of the international street there. They found that buried in a wall at Disneyland when they were remodeling, because it was to show people that they were going to build this.
Wow, man.
I think, is it Discovery Bay next?
Yes, sir.
Now this one, it was going to be another land. It was going to open in the 70s. It was going to be based on Jules Verne and H.G. Wells type fantasy. It was inspired by a movie called Island at the Top of the World, but it didn't make any money. So this is what killed the land. But that's a picture of what the land was going to look like. You see the Nautilus there on the left, and then there's the sailing ship, the Hyperion, in the hangar there. And two of the characters we'll talk about next week, Figment and Dreamfinder, were invented for this land. But he was going to be called Professor Marvel, and he dealt with baby dragons. And we have a picture, and that's Professor Marvel there, and the dragon that became Figment is on the left. And there's the maquette there of Professor Marvel and what became Figment. And then there's a drawing, Figment and Dreamfinder. And now they were in Epcot, but that ride's been removed. And we know that your wife loves Figment.
That's right. Yep.
If you want to, in that main folder, I have the story of Walt's last time at Disneyland. That will finish up if you have time.
Sure thing. Let's see. Fire away.
When Walt's official last visit to Disneyland was on October 14th, 1966. It was because we mentioned in a previous show where he got that award from Eisenhower for being an American patriot. Well, he said he's not a real hero. The Congressional Medal of Honor people are heroes. And these are the only photos I could find that this ever happened at Disneyland, where he invited
which photo or which
it's called the Walt's last photo or last visit or something like that.
Well, I'm not finding
it's in the main folder where all the lands there.
Oh, gotcha now. Okay, I caught up to you.
Because I had this morning, when I found that Yippee story, I added a full photo of that. If you want to show that when we're done, just real quick, just the photos. I already told the story.
Yeah. So you want to do Walt's and then Yippee?
Yeah. Go ahead. So Walt did this Congressional Medal of Honor event at Disneyland to honor all the people that won that award. And it's the only thing I could find. There was an auction for this. This is a program from the event that must have been some of the honorees that had this. And there's no photos I can find of this. It's not in any of the books. I can just find write-ups that this existed. This happened. But this was his last official visit to Disneyland. But he was there one more time, and that was to take publicity photos.
And what was the date on this again?
October 14th, 1966. I've tried several different ways to find photos of this on Google and different places. And Walt signed that there. That's his signature on this auction. And this auction went for $500 for these 4 things there and Walt's signature. But I think it's more interesting because this is the last time he was at the park. He built the park to celebrate American ideals like a World's Fair. That's him when he got the award that inspired him to do this. And this is like the bookend of that. And this is when he did his last photo at the Magic Kingdom. It was a couple weeks after that. And the photographer said that he asked the photographer if was any more film in the camera, and there was only one picture left. And Walt said, well, go ahead and take the last picture. And they took the last picture, and it's Walt and his fire engine. There's 2 photos of him in the fire engine there. And that's Walt's last picture ever taken. And that's a very famous picture. You'll see posters and things of this. I don't know which one it is. It's the actual last one, but it's him in that fire engine there. And then that last one there is Walt with Epcot.
Gosh.
But I've seen that photo lots of times. I never realized that was the last photo of Walt Disney.
Wow.
That's going to Walt build with Epcot there. We'll get into that another time. And that's the postage stamp Walt was on. That's the only time it was ever waived. It used to be the rule you had to be dead 10 years before it could be on a postage stamp. And they did that the following year after he died. They put him on a postage stamp. And that's like the characters from Small World with him on the stamp.
Wow.
And then the last thing is the Yippies taking over Disneyland. Oh, and I just found out about that this morning. You just won't believe this.
Yeah, I've never heard of this.
I never had either.
It's
and
not
I'm
like something that would happen today.
I know. And they put this thing out. They were going to take over Disneyland and do all that stuff there.
So they telegraphed they were coming.
Yeah, they telegraphed they were coming. And that's them taking over the pirate ship, the ship Chicken of the Sea. And they're on the ship there.
Remind those that may have missed earlier in the conversation.
The Yippies were invading Disneyland. They were going to have the Black Panthers take over Aunt Jemima's kitchen for breakfast and liberate Aunt Jemima. Then they were going to go to militant feminists. We're going to liberate Minnie Mouse. They were going to go to Tom Sawyer Island to protest the Vietnam War, and that's what's going on there. And there they are in the fort. They're hanging. Is that a Chinese flag there? I don't know.
I think that's a North Vietnamese flag.
Yeah. Okay. I just found this out this morning, and I haven't had time to research a lot of this, but I just found these pictures incredible.
Yeah. This is stunning. I mean, this is lost history.
And they went running through Main Street, shouting obscenities and things, and they ended up. Disneyland called the police to get them out of the park, and 23 of them got arrested. Oh. And they were carrying flags with the marijuana leaf. And there they are in front of the castle, the police, and they closed the park early for the day. And it freaked out the people at Disneyland so much, the staff there. That's why they closed the Indian Village and Aunt Jemima's kitchen. And I mean, look, that looks like a riot there. Mm-hmm. And
this was August 6th,
1970.
Okay.
And it's nothing I'd ever heard of before. I just think that's an incredible story. Yeah. And they made one of the things they did because of this is they made a rule that no men with long hair could come into the park. And that stayed in place till the 90s. But that was because that's what the Yippies were. Well, they had the thing about no public displays of gay affection in the park. You know, that was an actual rule. Now they have the gay days.
Yeah, interesting. Wow, we covered a lot of ground today. We sure did. So next week, it's animal.
The animated characters.
Sorry, I can't even read my own handwriting, man.
Well, that's okay. And that's because what I'll do is I'll put out the opening of the Mickey Mouse. So there's all these characters in there. And before people knew who all those characters were, now you don't know who a lot of them are. And I'm going to tell you who those characters are and some of the stories behind the animated films and things like that. Because we haven't really gotten to the animated films yet.
Yeah. And then looking ahead, live action coming up after that. So yeah, we'll be doing this until through March 23rd. If you've missed any of these episodes, check the playlist here. We've been doing these Saturday mornings live streams with Ed on Disney history, saving Disney history. Back in December, I think we started this, man. So
it was right after Christmas.
Yeah, so be sure to go back and check.
Counting to Easter.
That's right. So, Ed, thanks again, as always, for sharing your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it, man. It's
you're welcome.
Very important that we save our history, and you're doing your part on saving Disney history. It's very important that we remember our past as a nation, and the Walt Disney story is a large part of that, for sure.
It is.
All right. Well, Ed and everyone, thank you for joining us today. We will see you a week from today at 11 a.m. Eastern. Don't forget the Friday live stream coming up as well, 2 p.m. Eastern on Friday. And we will see you then. Thanks so much.
See you guys.